So, good afternoon and welcome to the Cambridgeshire County Council Children and Young People's Committee. The meeting room today has been arranged to comply with public health guidance on COVID safety. And to facilitate discussion today, I intend to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I will, however, also allow members to speak more than once on an item if appropriate. However, please make sure your contributions remain both relevant and concise and are directed through the chair. Today, there is no fire alarm test scheduled, so if the alarm does sound, I'll adjourn the meeting and we will all leave the building by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble outside at the far right-hand end of the building. I'd like to remind all committee members, officers and public speakers that this meeting will be broadcast live and a video recording of the meeting will be published on the Council's website. Before we start, I'd like to hand over to Vice Chair Maria, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just say a couple of words, and I hope all of you as members of our Children and Young People Committee join me in expressing our endless sympathy and support for children and their family who are caught up in the senseless and cruel fighting and suffering in Ukraine. And also I want to extend our support to young people who find themselves on the front line, and that goes for both sides engaged in the current conflict. And I hope that you'll join me in supporting, hoping to the violence will end as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So item one is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies for absence, please?
We've received apologies from Councillor Thompson, who is substituted by Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Rashenda, and welcome to Councillor Bradnam today. Does any member today wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Nope. So the next item is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 18th of January, as an accurate record. Can I ask any member who does not agree to raise their hand now? See no objections to that proposal, so we'll approve the minutes as an accurate record and we'll take that as carried unanimously.
Sorry, not unanimously because I wasn't at the last meeting. So I'll abstain if you want to take a nap.
Do we need a vote or can we just note the abstention? Brilliant. Thank you, Rashenda. Thank you, Councillor Bradman. And the action log was included in the published papers for this meeting. Are there any questions on the action log from the previous meeting, please? Okay, we'll take that as noted. Item three this afternoon is petitions and public question time. We've received no petitions this month, but we have received 4 public questions and comments. These all relate to item number 6, the delivery of the early years provision to Abbey Division in Cambridge. So we will hear them when we do reach item 6. Item 4 is the proposed tender framework for early years and childcare provision. Penny Price, our area education officer, is joining us remotely to present the report. So over to Penny, please.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Growth across Cambridgeshire and the impact of COVID on early years settings has resulted in an increase in the number of early years tenders that are required across the county at the moment. A recent audit report identified the need for a formal policy on tendering, and this paper seeks approval and sets out that policy, which formalises the process by which childcare opportunities are offered to the private, voluntary and independent sectors. Appendix 2 sets out the detail of the policy, and though the preferred course of action is tendering, it also sets out the criteria on which we would seek an exemption. The paper also provides details of decision-making process for less than best consideration when we have a rental which is less than 20,000. Advice was taken when preparing this paper from our procurement team to ensure that the paper meets all the procurement requirements for the local authority. Are there any questions? I was asked to keep it brief, so I've tried to be as brief as possible.
That's good. Thank you, Penny. Any questions or comments on this from committee members, please? Councillor Hay, please.
I just want to clarify, in the paperwork and in the recommendation, it mentions Appendix 2. I couldn't find anything with Appendix 2 on. Am I right in thinking it starts on page 23, the policy on when to tender for early years? Because if that's it, it doesn't actually tell you it's Appendix 2.
On page 23.
I think it's called that on the attachment, I'm being told. I think it's different in the papers. Couldn't find an attachment.
But you are correct. It is named the policy on when to tender for early years and childcare provision.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this? Sorry, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, are we debating this now? Yeah. I would just like to say that as near enough a local member there, Penny did brief myself and Councillor Ferguson on this prior to the committee. So we were very, very much well informed about this. We have had a local resident and a school governor ask questions, and Penny has answered the questions. And the local resident has said overall is glad that the retendering is being discussed.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, we've discussed tendering for earlier provisions at previous meetings. There's always been concern that running these tender processes with the kind of requisite speed to achieve what we need in terms of providing sufficiency. I can see in the policy that it's distinguishing where we'll put it out to tender and where we will not. Is there a mechanism in here that means that we'll be able to carry out these processes quicker than we would without this policy? I wonder if we could just go into that into a little bit of detail.
I don't know if you want to take that, Penny, or John.
We are working on a framework which will enable us to carry out the process much faster. And this policy will also streamline decision making, I think. I don't know if John wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing to comment is that we would look to use spokes if we had to get through a quicker process. Obviously, what we want to do is transparent, and that's why we brought this paper to you. But there will sometimes be a need to expedite the process. So that will be part of the thinking, but we'll certainly work through spokes if that's the case.
So will there be a further paper on a kind of more detailed framework to come to a future committee? Or
can I suggest we probably bring back a note, we send a note round to confirm how that's going to work. If you think it's worthy of debate at a future meeting, we bring it to you. Obviously, I think the paper encapsulates the process and the exception will circulate that, and very happy to bring it back, but I'm hoping it would be straightforward. So.
Thank you. Unless there's any further comment, no. So the report recommendation will move to a vote. The co-opting members of the committee are not eligible to vote on this item. We're being asked to endorse the tender policy as set out in Appendix 2, or the earlier noted naming of that, to this report for immediate adoption and implementation. And B, to note the existing delegation to officers to enter into agreements to dispose of interest in property at less than best consideration up to an annual rental limit of £20,000. Is there any disagreement, or can we take this as approved unanimously?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thanks, everybody. So item 5. Item 5 is about tendering for early years places in Loves Farm, St Neots, and a copy of this report has been sent to all the county councillors with divisions in St Neots. Penny, I think you're also presenting this one, please.
Yes, thank you. This paper sets out the need to tender for early years in Loves Farm and Wintringham Park catchment areas in St Neots in order to ensure we continue to meet our sufficiency duty. We believe that we currently have sufficient places across St Neots, sufficient early years places, but we would not wish to lose any at the moment. And we have 2 set-ins that are due to have their leases coming to an end. So we are seeking approval to carry out these tenders. It's a key decision as the tender value is over 500,000, and this has also been considered by spokes.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Can I offer my apologies? Can I go backwards? What I just previously said is for this one.
Any other questions or comments on St Neots and Loves Farm? No. So we're being asked to approve the initiation of a tender process and delegate the subsequent decision relating to the award of a tender to the Service Director for Education in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People Committee in order to secure new childcare providers to deliver provision from the Roundhouse Primary Academy in Loves Farm, St Neots, and B, the Community Centre, Kester Way, Loves Farm, St Neots. Councillor Ambrose Smith, please.
Chair, is this contract over £500,000? Should it not then come back to committee rather than just be left to the Chair and Vice Chair in consultation?
I think that's what we're discussing now, is moving it as a, yeah.
Yes, I'm asking. That is my question. Should it not come back to committee because it is over £500,000?
So it would come back for ratification. Do you want to come in, John?
We would bring it back as a decision. Obviously, we need to move forward with the timescale. Obviously, committee pending, if we can get it into those committees, we will. But with this one, we need to move on with it because there's a risk around the provision here if we don't move quickly on this. That's why we're seeking that exemption for this particular scenario. Again, more than happy to email it around to members when we've made that decision, so you're very clear on that's the decision we're going to take. My worry is that you're not going to be involved with the process. You won't know who the other people are that are bidding for it, and likely we'll bring something here to be rubber stamped anyway. So, but equally, I'm very happy to do a briefing note to you prior to this formally being adopted. Obviously, what we won't be able to do is do it via committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan.
Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, just on that, I just think the reason Councillor Ambrose Smith was asking was because we have previously had in the papers that the monitoring officer said that we had to bring all decisions to committee. But my understanding is Jonathan's saying he's asking for an exemption in this circumstance because of the speed of that. And I just think that might be worth putting in the minutes just so we don't make that decision every time.
Yeah, happy to do that. Can we add that in, please, Rashanda? Thank you. Okay, are we happy to move to vote on this one? Co-opted members do not have voting rights on this item. Would those in favour of the recommendations please raise their hands? Thank you. I think that's, yep, thank you. So item 6. Item 6 is the delivery of early years provision to serve Abbey Division, Cambridge. Hazel Bellchamber, welcome. The Assistant Director for Education, Capital and Place Planning. You're joining us remotely to introduce this report, and then we will hear from our public speakers before I open up the debate to committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as will become evident when you hear the public speakers, that there's very strong community support for the proposals in front of you this afternoon. I really just want to confirm that the Council will continue to be able to meet its sufficiency duty if the decision is taken to support the relocation of Seesaw Preschool back to the East Barnwell Community Hub as part of that redevelopment project. Such a move could also support the Fields, one of the council's maintained nursery schools, which operates from the Galfrey Primary School site, as it would restore the former balance of early years and childcare provision for families living in the Abbey division, which is the most deprived one in the city, and I think would serve also to reinforce the separate identities of both the preschool and the nursery. And finally, I suppose, before I just hand over to the public speakers, I'd like to apologise for an error in section 4.1. Figure quoted should be 15,000 and not 20,000, so it's consistent with the other figures quoted in the report. Thank you.
Sorry, Hazel, could you just repeat the last bit around the figure, because you broke up slightly?
Oh, sorry. It's the figure in section 4.1 should read 15,000 and not 20,000. It just makes it then consistent with the figure quoted earlier in the report.
That was a very quick saving of £5,000 there. Thank you, Hazel. Very briefly, before we do move to our public speakers, I'm aware that this is your last meeting with us today, Hazel, and we would like to thank you for all 34 years of your service to the council and wish you well in retirement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really appreciated.
So our first speaker is Nikki Massey. Nikki is a local resident and a previous city councillor for Abbey Ward. Nikki is joining us remotely, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to share your thoughts with us. If you are still speaking after 3 minutes, the Democratic Services Officer will let us know, and you'll need to draw your remarks to a close. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. I should not need that long. In March 2021, I spoke at this committee to support the voices of residents who wish for the promise of early years provision at the East Barnwell Centre to be fulfilled. Sadly, at that time, it was decided not to move the nursery back to the community centre. So therefore, I am thrilled that a year later, under the new administration and with the support of the Abbey County Councillor, Alex Burleigh, that this has been brought again to this committee with the recommendation that the Cecil Nursery is to be returned to its previous location once the new East Barnwell Community Centre is completed. We know that early years education is so vital for social skills and sets a foundation for lifelong learning behaviour and health. It's important that everyone can access early years education and not limit it to just a few areas of a ward. And I'm hopeful that our voices are heard loud and clear today. And I once again urge the committee to vote for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Does anyone have any questions of clarification for Nikki, not general debate? Thank you. Nope. So we now hear from our second public speaker. This is Councillor Half Davies, who's the Cambridge City Councillor representing Abbey Ward. Councillor Davies, thank you for joining us today. You have up to 3 minutes to share your thoughts with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the main thing that I wanted to emphasise today is that one of the key points made by Abbey residents about the early years provision in Abbey and about the relocation of Seesaw into the East Barnwell Community Centre is that it's so important to have a range of services available to families all in the same place. And that's what this decision would enable. It's about the collocation of services at the heart of the East Barnwell community. And at the moment, the current situation disadvantages families who live north of Newmarket Road in the north of the East Barnwell area. They have to travel further. They don't have the same level of community services available within a short distance of their homes. And this area includes some of the most disadvantaged street groups in the most disadvantaged ward of the city. So the collocation of services, including, a new home for early years within the East Barnwell Centre, has always been the clear wish and expectation of East Barnwell residents. We know that this project is long-standing, and this has been a key point and a clear expectation of the community, and deciding today to relocate Seesaw into the East Barnwell Centre would be meeting an expectation and a desire that the community has held for a really long time, and would meet a need that the community has had for a long time. It would bring a huge benefit to local families and to children in the area, not just to those who attend Seesaw, but would also benefit the fields and families who attend there as well. And essentially, it's just to reiterate that your support today for the inclusion of early years provision within the East Barnwell Centre would be really appreciated by the community and meets a real community need in an area where that support is needed. And just wanted to thank the officers for their work on this, and to thank Councillor Boulat, and to thank the members of the community who have been working for and towards this recommendation, and just thanks everyone for their work. And I really hope that the decision can be supported and the recommendation can be supported today. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Does anyone have any questions of clarification from Councillor Davies? No? So our next public speaker is Reverend Stuart Wood. Stuart Wood is a trustee of Seesaw Preschool and will be speaking on behalf of Seesaw. You have 3 minutes to share your thoughts. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you too for the report and the papers that have been sent out, which are really helpful. As the report highlights in section 1.2, Seesaw has been on the East Barnwell Community Centre site for over 20 years. And again, in 4.5, it talks about the first development or redevelopment of the centre being mooted in 2013. Some of us have been involved in that process all the way through. And at every stage along the process, the County Council have reaffirmed their commitment to re-provide preschool provision on that site. At every meeting we've had, at every plans that have been proposed, that's been what's been put forward, and that's what we've been expecting. And so it came as a bit of a shock to all of us as trustees last March when the proposal was then put forward that it wouldn't then happen. Wasn't what we were expecting, wasn't what we've been led to believe, it wasn't what we've been promised over since 2013. And as written responses that are found in Appendix 2 indicate, that we had some issues with how the report was written and presented, and we felt there were some things that were not quite accurate in terms of how it's presented. So we've highlighted that in that Appendix 2 in our written responses. And if you haven't read it, then I'd encourage you to do that, because that does help perhaps understand how we felt we were misrepresented and how the community's voice wasn't heard. It's quite the irony of what happened that last year wasn't lost on us, that at a point when the County Council was pushing forward a Think Communities approach to how it does its services, a proposal was taken to a committee to completely ignore what the community was wanting and were expecting and were thinking. And we welcome the idea and the proposal today that actually puts what the community wants back at the heart of this proposal. One of the things I would like to highlight is a flawed rationale that was in the original proposal and in the report that was presented last year. I've highlighted it again in my written response in Appendix 2. And again, it's flagged up in section 1.6 of the report that's presented to you today. And that is that the Seesaw Nursery have managed to sustain its success despite being relocated. What isn't taken into account there is the hard work of staff and trustees in the community to keep those numbers up. We did lose families. We did lose families because of the relocation, because families found it too difficult to travel from Fenditton Primary and Teversham Primary in the north part of the area to the setting, and we lost them from the setting. But because of the hard work, because of the way we increased our profile by working alongside Abbey people, by having the hub facility on Barnwell Road where we have advertising and promotion there, we were able to recruit those spaces. The success, therefore, of keeping numbers up was not because we relocated, it's because we worked hard to make sure numbers stayed up. And that isn't taken into account in the original document or in the document that is presented in that decision. So we want that to be noted, really. We also want to highlight the fact that this was a temporary arrangement. We agreed to it on a temporary basis. Ofsted,
3 minutes.
Okay, Ofsted agreed to that as well, and they approved that. And we would support the recommendations that have been brought to this committee. And thank you for reconsidering this for us.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of clarification from committee members on what Reverend Woods has said? I see no hands. So our final public speaker is Nikki Shepherd. Welcome, Nikki. Nikki is the CEO of Abbey People, and you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you very much. Members of our community have spent years keeping the community centre and Seesaw going and working with officers towards a vision of a new community hub. This paper that's being presented today to the committee is a welcome transition from recent work in the community, and its recommendations are in line with the community's wishes for a new community hub on the site of the East Barnwell Community Centre and Seesaw Youth Building. Over 9 years, the community has participated in multiple consultations with ongoing partner meetings. And the original community vision was to regenerate the community centre to create a community hub for the community with additional services co-located on site, and where families, especially from Seesaw Preschool, some of the most deprived in the area, would have close access to services and support that they aren't currently accessing. The vision is dependent on more people accessing the site, and the inclusion of Seesaw contributes to the whole site being a success, as well as giving children who have been especially impacted by the pandemic better opportunities of a good start in life. And it's even more important post-pandemic because of the impacts we know the pandemic has had on these individuals. And also in line with the government's plans to introduce family hubs, which show that the co-location of services is more important than ever. There's a wide range of needs across our community, and not all families look for the same things in an early years provider for their children. The cost of place as well as location is really important. And all of our community research has shown that the community would like to have school provision, preschool provision across different sites, not all in the same physical location. And the right early years provision has been shown to be transformative for children. And Seesaw doesn't just serve the Galford school catchment, it also serves those north of Newmarket Road and those closer to the edges of the city boundary, which makes the Newmarket Road site really, really important for that provision. And over the pandemic in Abbey, the ward has seen a huge increase in benefits claimants, and we are on a daily basis seeing new people across the community facilities who need help and advice and additional support, and we expect this to continue over the next few years. The current providers across the area are all working together in order to try to provide solutions to break the cycle of inequality in our ward, and co-location of these types of services is really, really important. The community of Abbey needs you, the members of the Children and Young People Committee, to do the right thing, and we really support and welcome the officer's report that has come forward today, and we would ask you to support the recommendations within that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Do we have any questions of clarification from committee members on what Nikki has said? No, thank you. Thank you to all our public speakers for taking the time to join us today and for sharing the local community's views on the recommendation before us. We will take these views into consideration as we reach our decision. I will now open the report to debate by committee members only. Sorry. Thank you. I will now open the report to debate by committee members only. I'm conscious that Councillor Boulat is the County Councillor representing Abbey Division, so I will invite her to speak first. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also wish to thank, first of all the 4 public speakers who I think made a very clear case once again of why this is indeed needed and supported in the local area in Abbey. And I wish to thank as well the many residents who spoke with me since I became councillor in May 2021. And this is indeed one of the top issues in Abbey that the community always speaks about. I also want to acknowledge the work that my predecessor, Councillor John Whitehead, did on this issue for many years. And as some of the public speakers have been highlighted, this has been an issue debated for about a decade now. I would like to also draw attention to the Appendix B that Reverend Wood mentioned, because that contains the written representations from Abbey people, CISO, and Stuart Wood as well, which clearly highlight the expectations at the time and the detail of this context. I'm really glad that the stakeholders group as well was able to meet a few times in the last year. And again, the need for this and the position of the community has been very clear in the stakeholder group. And I thank officers for that work on the stakeholder group as well. Now, some of you may wonder like why this is back being discussed today. So as everyone knows, last year, local councillors in Abbey and stakeholders, including all those from the stakeholder groups, were really disappointed with the decision not to have the nursery back in the East Barnwell plans. And I have to say that the local views haven't changed since. And unfortunately, the project of redeveloping East Barnwell hasn't been able to progress. And therefore, it created a lot more delay on an already delayed project that the community expects to be delivered at some point. As a local member, and I think I speak for all the city councillors as well in Abbey, all we want is to actually see a new community centre being developed in East Barnwell, a community centre that looks like it's 2022, not a forgotten site from the 70s, and actually somewhere where families and young people can access council services. This has been about a decade in the progress of debate and consultation. And of course, there's an issue of trust in authorities as well, the council's reputation in the area, because there has been a lot of long conversations and disappointment with the slow progress of this project. As the public speakers have mentioned, the residents were first consulted in 2013 on how the new East Barnwell community should look like. So if you think about this, the 3-year-olds back in 2013 are probably now in year 7, and the teenagers who were supposed to benefit from more youth provision in East Barnwell, who are 16, 15 back in 2013, now are around 25, 26 years old, close to my age, and probably have children and 2 3-year-olds of their own, many of them in East Barnwell. So it's really important we actually progress with this project, because the expectation was set, the community wants this, so now something needs to be delivered in East Barnwell. I think it's also a point about that some of these public speakers already mentioned, it's about equality and access to services as well, because in particular residents who live in north of Newmarket Road are the most disadvantaged. And this is exactly what the East Barnwell Hub would do with the early years provision, co-locating services and making sure that residents can access multiple services in the same place. You may think that the locations are quite close to where it is now and East Barnwell, but actually in Abbey there's quite a bad public transport system. So like we hope the GCP consultations will solve some of that and many other issues. So actually having the nursery in East Barnwell will serve a different demographic as well, and also will also help with our environmental priorities, making sure the services are closer to the communities. So as a local member, I do believe that we should listen to our communities, local communities. I think regardless of the political party that we're in, we are elected as councillors to represent the local residents' views. So today I'm doing exactly just that, representing what I hear every day on the early years issue in Abbey. And also if we adopt as the council the same communities approach, again, it's really important we listen to what is happening on the ground and what actually came out of the many, many consultations that those residents have been involved in. So I do hope that today the committee will support the proposal to deliver on what residents want, on what our local charity would like to see, on what other stakeholders and organizations who are involved in the stakeholder group would like to see as well. And I also hope that delivering on this and being able to get through this decision and deliver on the project of redeveloping East Barnwell will hopefully restore some of the trust in the authority, in the processes, in consultations in general, when it's quite difficult to have trust for residents after seeing many years of delay on this project. So those are my remarks on the overall debate. I would like to ask one specific thing based on the report. On 2.6 there, the report implies that there can be benefits for the Fields nursery if CISO is relocated back to the hub. So I have been in conversations with the Fields about sustainability in the long term for their provision, and I know people are concerned about that as well. So I'm quite keen to hear more detail, perhaps from Jonathan Lewis or other officers, about what impact do we actually expect on the Fields in terms of numbers and therefore longer term sustainability if CISO were to move. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. You okay to take that, please, John?
It's early days. We don't know yet. Obviously, I've been working very closely with the Fields Community to protect that nursery school. Their view in the school is that it will make a difference. You know, we'll open up the community to choice, and hopefully that will mean further numbers coming through. Nursery schools remain a key challenge, so it's a positive aspect of this proposal that could help to sustain that provision.
Thank you. I think I saw, did I see your hand, Councillor Sharp? Yep. And then Councillor Bradnam, please.
Yes, you did. I've got one simple question, and I know the area, not as well as obviously local members, but I do. It's just one question in that there doesn't appear to be any financial information in terms of costs on this. Because presumably if we're moving from one building to another, there are costs involved. Obviously, you know, that may not be the case, but so that's my only question on that.
I think I'll probably defer to Hazel with that one. She's got the details.
You're right, Councillor Sharp, that there would be a cost of obviously moving from the mobile, and that's been estimated at relatively small, at just around £1,000. Obviously, the main cost will be the capital cost associated with the including the provision within the design specification, and that is a decision that will rest with the Strategy and Resources Committee, who will meet on the 29th of March to consider it, and clearly we would be, the council would be supporting CISO with the relocation costs, as I say, which we estimate to just be over £1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I'm County Councillor for the Waterbeach Division, and you might have thought that's quite a long way away from here, but in fact, my division includes Fenditton, the northern part of Fenditton, and I know many of the parents in Fenditton actually used certainly the Fields Nursery and the associated services when they were available, and very much regretted the loss of the service in this area. So, as other speakers have pointed out, this part of Cambridge is significantly disadvantaged, but there were parents who were coming from further afield who found it an extremely useful and convenient location to take their children when in those days they were actually driving to work. And I'm hoping, I just wanted to congratulate the staff and the volunteers for keeping the provision going in that area, whilst it's been difficult and whilst the previous administration did not support this application. And I'm very glad that this administration is proposing and supporting this application. So I certainly welcome the co-location of this variety of services, and I shall be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hay, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask officers, in 2.3, it says the mobile is larger than currently. Sorry, it says the mobile is larger than currently required. Therefore, there's room for future expansion if there's demand for more places to be provided. How does that tie in with the statement made in the letter from Joe Brasher, the chair of Seesaw Preschool, which says that they are full Monday to Thursday with only having 8 spaces left on a Friday? It seems to contradict one another.
Hazel.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to get myself off mute. My understanding, Councillor Hayes, is it's to do with the they run sessional provision at Seesaw. They provide 48 places, so they are operating at capacity at the moment. But the mobile itself does have some space, which could mean that we could increase provision, but obviously that has staffing implications for the preschool as well. That is my current understanding. It's to do with the sessional arrangements of the how they organise themselves and their staffing capacity.
Right, so you are saying that there is room for expansion there, because I am concerned that if they move back to the barn, it's saying that the design specification would be for a space large enough to re-provide the current level of provision offered by Seesaw, and there will be no ability to increase provision from this building, which tells me it may not be sustainable.
It would be provided on a like-for-like basis, so it would provide for the 48 sessional places that Seesaw currently operate, and they operate very, very successfully, highly regarded provision. Freeing up the mobile would do, though, would be obviously, as we would hope, as the fields attracts more pupils as well, it would give us the potential to increase again early years provision on the Galfrid site, potentially as an offshoot from fields as a sort of a second base for the field. So I'm confident that with the retention of the mobile, we would be able to ensure we continue to meet our sufficiency duties and potentially increase provision as well in that area.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if one of the officers could characterise for me the nature of the promises and undertakings that were given to the Seesaw at the time of their first relocation, because obviously we've heard from the public speaker that they were under the impression that promises had been given. And I just wonder, it would be helpful to me to have a view of the county council as to what promises and undertakings were given, and whether that's the same or slightly different, just so that we can kind of understand the background to this decision.
I'm happy to make a start on that. I have to say I wasn't directly involved in those conversations at the time, Councillor Atkins, but my understanding is, and I think as you've heard from the speakers as well today, that there was a very clear expectation given at the time by council officers involved in those conversations that it would be a temporary move, and that Seesaw would then be relocated back to East Barnwell on the conclusion of the project.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
I've got just a quick question. It might be the same as Councillor Hayes, because I couldn't see capital costs in there, and I know Councillor Sharp asked about it, and helpfully Councillor Hayes highlighted it for me, so it is in there, and you've estimated up to 625,000 in extra capital requirements. But do you think that's quite conservative with a small c, given that there's obviously other things that you've put in there that needs engineering and such like? Do you think the capital costs could potentially be more, and what would you estimate them to be? That's a bit of a finger in the air, but
yeah, I mean, again, the capital costs, because this is part of a much bigger project, are really tied up in many ways with that. That is the most up to date figure I've got available, Councillor Hoy, and that's come directly from the finance colleagues who are overseeing this project in our strategy and assets team. So, you know, I'm sorry, but that is the best information that I currently have available to me. So yeah, it's the best estimate of those costs that we currently have.
Okay, thank you. I think as time progresses with this, I think we'll see those costs escalate quite rapidly, just seeing how council projects always seem to go, not just to this council, but every council, they always seem to double or sometimes treble the final costs. So I'm going to make a bit of a statement now, rather than sort of a question. It's, I'm not going to go against this. I mean, I don't want to kind of be too negative, because I don't know too much about Abbey Ward other than obviously what I've heard from local members and obviously the community. And I do believe you should listen to what people say in areas that you don't represent. But it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention the fact that what we're actually talking about here is relocation almost to a preferred site. So the current site, I don't believe, and I don't believe when I went to committee last time, is inadequate. I think that there's many good reasons you could make for it to stay where it is, not least the fact that it's quite good for children to start a nursery on the same site that they'll then be going to school. I understand the case has been made and the reasons why people would prefer it in a different location, but I think it feels to me very much a political decision. Now, I understand that and I get that completely. You know, once you take charge, you do get to do stuff in your area. That's kind of the benefit of it. And I understand that. But I think my frustration is that we're often told by residents in my area, Cambridge gets all the money and there's never anything for Fenland, when our area is much, much more deprived. And I always say, you know, yeah, it is very disappointing. And all I would ask is that when we make future decisions, whether on this agenda or a later agendas about spending capital monies in Fenland, people will think about that with an open mind as well, because you know, it is quite a large chunk of money to be spending in an area, and I just hope people will feel the same way when it's not their area.
Thank you. Councillor Hay, did you want to? Thank you.
Yes, it was the same thing I wanted to speak of, but my concern was the figure. It says the extra capital requirement to deliver the early years provision at East Barnwell would range from 400,000 to 625,000. Why such a disparity? Nearly 50% more than the lower figure.
So, Hazel, do you know?
Again, I'm sorry, I can't comment in detail. I've been provided with those figures, as I say, by the Strategic Assets Service that are dealing with this. I think fundamentally it will come down to the infrastructure works that are necessary at the time, and potentially at the moment. And I think this will be referenced in the report you're about to hear from Ian, is that we are seeing, regrettably, as you know, across the board, prices increasing as a result of inflation. So we as the council can expect cost of materials and labour to increase. So I think that we've been provided with that range in recognition that we are seeing costs rising across the board. So there is the potential, obviously, for that higher figure to be the one that ends up being what the council would end up having to invest at the end of the day. That's my understanding, Councillor Hay, of why the range has been given.
Right, if I can just come back on that then. I'm sure that this will go to Resources Committee. So what I would ask is, in the report that goes to them, can an explanation be given of why there's such a disparity between the lower and the higher figures? If you could get that from the finance people in the assets.
Yes, and again, my understanding, Councillor Hayes, that this will definitely be a report that goes to the Strategy and Resources Committee on the 29th of March, and that obviously it will have far more detail in it in respect of the capital costs as well. But I will certainly pass on that clear request to my colleagues who will be compiling that report and presenting it at the time.
Thank you, Hazel. And we have a very polite hand up from Ian Trafford, please.
Yeah, I was hoping I could add to the discussion on the disparity, and I know it's something we can contribute to further when it goes to strategy and resources. We're not designing the scheme, but I did have a colleague in my team look at the capital cost. And while we can sort of estimate what the cost would be based upon floor area, a broad order of cost, as we're not actually procuring this scheme, or we're not the designers, we don't know how the treatment of shared costs, the services for the building and all that type of thing, the shared infrastructure is going to be apportioned across the scheme, or our element of the scheme. So that was probably part of the reason for the very broad estimate of cost, but that will be firmed up as we go along.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments on this, please? No, in which case we will move to a vote. Co-opting members of the committee are not eligible to vote on this item. We are being asked to A, support the proposal that Strategy and Resources Committee be asked to approve the inclusion of the accommodation for delivery of early years and childcare in the design and build specification for the redevelopment of the East Barnwell Community Hub and the associated capital funding for this. And B, to approve the proposal that the council would not be required to undertake a tender process for the early years and childcare provision on the basis that the Seesaw Preschool previously operated from the East Barnwell Community Hub and had no option other than to relocate to temporary accommodation on the site of the Galford Primary School to facilitate the redevelopment project. Would those in favour of the recommendations please raise their hands now? I think that's unanimous. Yep, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Hazel, and best wishes again, Hazel. Thank you. Item 7. Item 7 is the award of design and construction contracts for education projects included in the council's approved business plan. Ian Trafford, Strategic Education Capital Programme Manager, is joining us remotely to give us a brief overview of this report. Thank you.
Thank you. There are probably two distinct parts to this report. There's part one is seeking formal approval of the committee to enter into contract to deliver those school schemes in the approved council business plan.
Chair, can we ask Mr. Trafford to turn off his camera so we have a better chance of hearing his audio?
Oh. Okay, is that better? I will start again.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, there are probably two distinct parts to this report. There's the part one, which is seeking the formal approval of committee to enter into contracts to deliver the school schemes that are in the council's approved business plan. And then part two is seeking approval to direct award the contract for the delivery of the second phase expansion of the North Stowe Secondary School to the contractor that successfully delivered phase one. Part one of the report really reflects the advice of the County Council's monitoring officer. The business plan approval in itself isn't sufficient to enter into a contract, and that a further or separate permission is required to commit resources at the contract stage. And above a value of £500,000, which virtually all of our projects are, this approval should be at committee level. Obviously, the school's capital programme is a large programme, and a number of schemes can reach contract approval stage in any 12-month period. And those reaching that stage in the next 12-month period are set out in Table 1. There's quite a large number, and sort of this paper's trying to suggest what's the best way to manage that approval process. And the suggestion is that on this occasion we give approval to enter into contracts for those schemes in the programme that reach that stage in 2022-3, and that in future years we seek that approval alongside the annual review of the capital programme, which is usually in the autumn time. Having said that, that approval probably needs to be within certain parameters, and it's suggested that those projects must remain within the overall project budget set, that we're meeting our own local benchmarks on cost and building specification, and also a further proviso that if a scheme is considered controversial, and some of our schemes can be controversial once we reach planning stage, it can be brought back to committee for individual contract approval if necessary. The second part of the paper is seeking approval to award the contract for phase 2 of North Stowe Secondary School to the contractor who successfully delivered phase 1, Kier Construction. Although our contractor framework recently re-tendered and let late in 2021 does include provision for direct award, in these specific circumstances where we feel there are benefits of continuity and familiarity in terms of moving into phase 2. Procurement advice is that there's still a waiver is still required, and as it's again over 500,000, any waiver to go to direct award needs to be made at committee level. We have set out briefly our reasons for this request. As I've said, the successful delivery of phase 1 of the North Stowe scheme by the same contractor within time and within budget. In the recent retender of our framework, and that is within the last 12 months, Kier Construction submitted the lowest rates of all the contractors on this value lot. And obviously we will hold them to those rates through our design process and milestone process as we take the project forward. There's the benefits of acquired knowledge in terms of scheme design, stakeholder engagement, and guarantee of warranties. But we're also moving into an era where building inflation is expected to peak at around 9% this year, based on the construction market indices. And there's more benefit to actually moving forward as quickly as we can. If we were to do an internal competition, that would take between 12 and 14 weeks, a mini competition through the framework. But also having that prior knowledge means contractor coming in can also secure design packages, supplies, and fixed prices probably sooner than if we went with a new contractor. So for those reasons, we're seeking direct award on this particular scheme, although competitive mini tenders within the framework would remain the norm for other projects.
Thank you, Ian. We would normally have Councillor Thompson here, who is the local member for North Stowe, but she has sent a comment which Maria is going to read to us first.
Thank you. So on behalf of Councillor Phyllis Thompson, I'll read out. I would like to stress that I'm delighted to see the design and construction contract for phase 2 of the North Stowe Education Campus on the agenda today. It is essential that North Stowe Secondary College's post-16 building is ready for September 2024 opening to ensure that the current Year 9s can seamlessly continue their education. I understand from our offices that there is a review of the overall demand for post-16 places that was undertaken across Cambridge Partnership area, Cambridge City South Camps and East Camps. Though not North Stowe specific, and the additional capacity was required across this area by 2024. This was to be provided by the opening of post-16 provision at both North Stowe and Camborne. The review I referred to was approved by CYP committee previously. In the new era of rising inflation forecast to peak 9% this year in the construction industry, there is a stronger case for direct award, as a greater benefit may accrue to the authority from being able to conclude design packages, secure supply and fix prices at the earliest opportunity. Having spoken recently to North Stowe Secondary School, it was highlighted that they're also getting tight for teaching classrooms and they're filling up rapidly. So the 2024 completion date is essential to accommodate the increase in numbers of pupils. I would ask the committee to vote for this agenda item, and thank you in doing so.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments from the committee, please? Councillor Atkins, please.
I have just a couple of brief questions, if I may. First of all, the report talks about the risks we'd be exposed to if we appointed a different contractor to do phase 2 of North Stowe from the contractor that we appointed to complete phase 1. I suppose my question then is, why did we tender separately for phases 1 and 2 if this was always going to be the situation after phase 1 was completed? And why did we not tender for both phases at the same time? Given that we're now, I mean, I completely agree with the conclusions of the report that the direct award is the right way to go. I just wonder why we made that decision in the first place to split the 2 phases.
Thank you. Ian, are you able to answer that one?
Yes. I mean, it's something we've subsequently reflected on ourselves as a team, and I think you're right. We probably haven't helped ourselves in the way we let the contract for the original scheme, and it's certainly something we're looking at in terms of other campus developments we've got in the education sector across Cambridgeshire, like Alconbury Weald, which will be a secondary and a special school. So we're not in this position again having to come back and seek a direct award. We actually cover that off in the initial contract stages and let it for the whole job, even though this might take place over several years in the development of a campus. So yes, we are looking at our own practice on the back of that, and it's a fair comment.
Sorry, I had one further question, which was just sort of to do with the sustainability of these contracts, because as we've heard from the local member, there really is quite a kind of time concern now as to the opening of this secondary school, and the report talks in fairly sort of glowing terms about the cost control that Kier managed to deliver in phase 1 and the rates that they've submitted as part of the framework. But in the context of the significant kind of inflation in building costs that we've seen, do you have any concerns about the sustainability of the prices in the contract? And I'm not suggesting we should spend any more money than we have to, but if we write a contract that then turns out to be undeliverable for the contractor, that's then a risk to delivery in a timely fashion. So I suppose, so one question would be, do you know the profit that Kier retained on the contract value of 42 million for phase 1? And are they confident that the rates that they've submitted in for this phase 2 are going to be sustainable, and they're not going to turn around in 12 months and say, oh, actually, we can't deliver it to the cost that we promised, and we then have to go through some hideous renegotiation that takes time, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think on that one, two things. Obviously, the award of the contract didn't take place until December 2021, and in setting the rates, they've been sort of set in sort of the current marketplace in terms of what's happening in the construction sector and the increased costs and difficulty of supply chains coming through. As regards mitigating cost overruns, in the approval of the council's business plan, we did allow for outturn costs of 4% increase based upon for contracts being let this year based upon the indices as it was then, and that was subsequently increased by a further 3%, which the employer will hold and hopefully retain. So to a certain extent, in the outturn budget, we have covered off some of the inflationary impact. So on that basis, I would be hopeful that we can hold the line on the framework rates and the budget that's been set for this scheme.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you. And just want to say that we fully appreciate the reasons Ian laid out to enable you to do a direct award to Kier. And it's really important to hear the voice of Councillor Thompson as well as a local member. But just want to say that, following Councillor Atkins' questions and points as well, that we kind of do all, I'm sure, appreciate that the competitive procedure, even within the framework, which we are here to vote under point A, does remain the best way to ensure that we receive value for money. And all the arguments which are laid out to support to reappoint Kier are usually the ones which the incumbent contractor consultancy group will put forward as part of mini competition, isn't it? So, just want to say that while we are absolutely behind the the ethos of what we're doing here. We just also want to make sure that we do see the framework being used and the tendering being used going forward as much as possible to ensure we always get value for money, and that there is as much kind of procurement competition within the framework as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions, please? No. So we'll move to a vote. Co-opted members of the committee do not have voting rights on this issue. The committee is recommended to A, approve the award of the pre-construction contracts and the design and construction contracts with a value over £500,000 for those schemes set out in table 1 of the report, and B, to approve the direct award of the design and construction contract for phase 2 of the Northstowe Education Campus to Kier Construction and the supporting consultant team. Would those in favour please raise their hands now? I think that's unanimous again. Thank you, Rashenda. So item 8. Item 8 is a request for a 1-year exemption to re-procure an expiring school transport contract. Martin Kemp, Quality Manager for the Social and Education Transport Team, is joining us remotely to introduce this report. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I've just the paper I bring to you today is an exemption for what we call a whole school contract. This is an award where one single operator provides the whole transport to a single school. In this case, the contract was originally let in 2019 following a split tender process where we trialled a whole school against the normal route system that we normally apply. Unfortunately, due to us in 2020 starting a new dynamic purchasing system with Peterborough, which came into existence in October the past year, the whole school contract tender was not included as part of the main dynamic purchasing system with our procurement team. The whole school contract would take us approximately 6 months to put in place, going through a procurement process. And we would need to ensure that we can market test and enable operators to as to the viability of the whole process. Sorry, I've got a bit of frog in my throat. Due to the effects of the pandemic, the bus market has been severely affected during the past 2 years, and in which case we've had a number of operators who have downsized or have lost resources and drivers to other industries. To enable us to and the market to recover, we're requesting the exemption for the whole school contract to Swavesey Village College for a period of 1 year to enable us to retest the market and enable our operators to recover to a more sustainable position.
Thank you. We're going to move to questions or comments. I have one first. Can you or John tell us about the school college and how they're finding the contract is working at the moment and their thoughts on this, please?
Certainly. We've had as I say, we've had the whole school contract in place since 2019. The college have found it exceptionally beneficial to themselves. The whole school contract allows negotiations between the school and the individual operator to enable them to vary their transport setup, which enables after school vehicles to be provided and routes to be adjusted to ensure that students get to and from the additional activities provided by the school.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, please, members? Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Thank you. Just a simple question. How long will the contract be for, please?
This particular contract was for 3 years. Obviously, we haven't actually looked at the provision going forward, but I would expect that we would probably look for a 3 to 5 year contract length, mainly because the investment that an operator would need to for a whole school contract because it's not about just providing the vehicles, it includes the whole ticket admin, behavioural infrastructure as well that goes with it.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, it's just on the recommendation C, where it's talking about delegation in consultation with the chair and vice chair. I understand with the pass of the urgency provision, but given the value of this contract and it's going to be for so many years, do you not think that should be coming back to committee rather than under delegation? Because it's quite a large amount for the contract.
I think one of the challenges, we let a lot of contracts around home to school transport. This is because it's consolidated. We wouldn't normally bring them through to committee. We would normally let it as part of a package of arrangements. But again, we're very happy to be transparent on it. The timing of the committee is one of the issues we need to deal with. So happy to, again, to put a briefing note through if that's sensible, if that meets your need.
Thank you, John. Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Yes, thank you for that, Jonathan. It's not just what will be there. We'll learn, the members will learn a lot from it, I think, for their own areas. So I would welcome a briefing paper.
I think what we're trying to do is do you an update. Not traditionally tendering rounds come for the start of the new academic year. Maybe we need to put together a briefing note for you on all the transport arrangements. It is a huge area of spend, but one where I think you're probably more interested in what's changing, demands, rather than necessarily individual routes. And that's where if we go down a procurement route, you'll see lots of individual tenders coming through. And I'd rather give you a view of transport through that briefing note if you're happy with that.
I think if not a briefing note, I think a road trip on a bus around the county, I think is called for on this one. Any further comments or questions, please? Are you not coming with us? All right, Councillor Ambrose-Smith has said no to that one. Thank you. So we are asked to agree an exemption waiver for Swaversey Village College whole school transport contract for a period of 1 year, to approve the subsequent procurement exercise to be run as detailed in the report below, and to delegate authority to the Service Director for Education in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People Committee to award a contract following the compliant procurement exercise. Any objections?
Objection, but you will add something about the briefing note and so forth to this.
Yes, we can add that in. Is that all right, Rashanda?
Yes, we would note that as an action.
Lovely, in which case I will take that as approved. Thank you, committee. Item 9. Item 9 is meeting demand for children with special educational needs and or a disability. This report is introduced remotely by Claire Buckingham, Strategic Education and Place Planning Manager, and Joe Headley, the head of the SEND, that's Special Educational Needs and Disabilities 0 to 25 service, is also joining us remotely. Thank you both.
Oh, hello, Claire Buckingham here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great, okay. So over the past few years, we've known a unprecedented increase in the numbers of children with special educational needs.
I said yes, and I'm sorry, Claire, we now can't hear you. Could we try without your camera? Thank you.
Yeah, will do. Okay, try again. So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right, okay. So over the past 2 years, we've seen an unprecedented increase in the numbers of children with special educational needs and or disability requiring a specialist education placement. This is not unique to Cambridgeshire. Data from the Department for Education shows that Cambridgeshire is broadly in line with its statistical neighbours in terms of the numbers of pupils who have an education, health and care plan, an EHCP, and the type of provision it makes for them. You can see that detail on page 91 in Appendix 1 of your bundle. The greatest type of need is for placement in area special school provision and places specialising in social, emotional and mental health needs. abbreviated to SEMH. And the areas of highest demand from additional places are currently in Fenland, but there is forecast to be increased demand in Huntingdonshire. It is a dynamic picture with new specialist placements being made virtually every week. In fact, since this report was finalised almost a fortnight ago, those for whom we are currently looking for places to confirm have dropped. So in that intervening fortnight, 17 children have had their specialist placement confirmed. So the overall number now is 194, not 211 as stated in the report. So the report sets out our approach to increasing the number of specialist places in the short term, in the next 6 to 18 months. So many of these children will be on track for specialist placement in September at the start of the new academic year. So our approach is multi-pronged. It involves the creation of additional special school places, the creation of dedicated provision for autism in particular, in line with existing enhanced resource bases that we already have attached to some of our existing mainstream schools, and these create the opportunities for inclusion for those pupils. And it's also through more efficient use of independent providers through negotiation of block contracts of placements. There's been an initial investment of 2.5 million, which was approved by the Capital Programme Board for inclusion in the Council's Business Capital Plan for 22-23. And in addition, Schools Forum approved a 0.5% transfer from the schools block to support the wider SEND transformation programme. So that 0.5% is 2.1 million. So that's 1 million of that has been identified to support specifically the creation of new provision. So those were the key points I wanted to stress. And obviously, if you've got questions, then happy to take them.
Thank you. John, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments and observations from me. We are an inclusive local authority. I think if you look at the chart on page 91, you can see our efforts are to keep children in their communities, supporting in mainstream schools and accessing with their peers wherever we possibly can. I think SEN generally is under huge pressure nationally. I think Claire's made that point. We expect a green paper on SEND to be published in the next couple of weeks that could fundamentally change actually the role of the local authority, the role of schools and others in how we support SEND. And I think we have to take stock of that, because that will obviously, may change our approach and our way forward. I have to say, Jo Headley has done a fantastic job working on provision, working with our schools and others that supported her to deliver this. In the context whereby we would love to give every child every place they've ever needed, the challenge we've got here is that we have a £40 million deficit in our high needs block. The good news is we've got information last week that we have been accepted by the DFE to enter the DFE safety valve funding scheme, which potentially could facilitate a write-off of our deficit budget. And I think until we reach that point, we have to live within our means and do the very best for our children, which is obviously the first thing we consider. But that financial constraint is something we will need to be very carefully monitoring and continue to work hard on. So, this report, I believe, moves us forward. It will give us that provision. It is the short and medium term we're focused on. Longer term, of course, we will consider the best way of delivering longer term needs for the children we've got, and understanding that rapid growth we've seen in SEND, particularly in the last 2 years, but prior to that, since the reforms came through to move from statements to education, health and care plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for all the work that all the officers have done on this, and I know the deficit keeps us awake at night, so that's good news that we may have hope on the horizon with that one. Councillor Hoy. Councillor Hoy has given a notice of a proposed amendment to this report's recommendations. This was circulated to all members of the committee yesterday for information and has been published on the council website. Councillor Hoy, would you like to move your amendment, please?
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I won't reread it because you've all had it circulated, but the basics of it is to provide for a new provision in Fenland for special educational needs. I understand that's a big ask, but I feel that the case is clearly made. It was made at last committee as well as in this report for a number of reasons. So it says again, obviously last committee was mentioned in this paper, it says again, there is a clear need. And I've seen myself, and I'm sure many other Fenland members have seen schools in their division that have got a special school named on their EHCP plans that they just are unable to access because there are no spaces. If you go to the report and just the table, that's the figures are mentioned as to how many places are needed. As you can see, the numbers needed in Fenland are over double that of any other area. So the numbers speak for themselves. And also, if you look at the map of provision that was included, as you can see, towards the south of the county, and actually not too bad for Hunts and East Cambs, there's a fair amount of provision, but left up in the north, we don't have that provision. We just have the one school, which I have to say is a wonderful school, but obviously they can only do so much. So the suggestion in the paper seems to be, and we've had suggested before about sending children to Huntingdon, and that's a problem for two reasons. Firstly, there'll be demand in Huntingdon, as we've already heard, for children in Hunts to attend school. And secondly, the transport costs. We cannot underestimate the cost of sending 30 plus children to Huntingdon on the revenue budget. Often these children can't get on a bus together. They are having perhaps individual taxis, and this is going to be very, very expensive. Now, I notice in the report that we say about expanding Medigate, but I have to be honest, I just feel like that's a real pipe dream. I mean, they've been speaking about that for the last perhaps 8 years, and it's never moved anywhere. Obviously, I hope it does, and that's why I've included that in my motion, because obviously that would be the preference. If they're happy to expand, I can see that suiting us in so many levels. A, because it would be a cheaper option. B, because they clearly do have the expertise and specialism that would require. However, if they can't do that, I think we need to have a plan B. The only other problem we do have with Medigate as well, it's a lot of children that live in the surrounding Norfolk villages go to that school. And so it makes up a large portion of their catchment area, which we've got no control over. Now, obviously, I know that there's going to be a large cost to this, and I kind of almost was intimating that earlier on. I know it's no one's area here, but hopefully you can see that there is really a clear need for this. I've deliberately tried to be quite loose and not prescriptive, because obviously I understand maybe I don't want to say how many places there needs to be, or how many necessarily where in Fenland it needs to be, because I think sometimes the more prescriptive you are, the more it ties people's hands to a certain decision. And I don't necessarily don't want to say today that we must make X decision, but I certainly think we should commit to doing it and exploring it within the next few years for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Do you have a seconder, please? Councillor Hay, thank you. So we will open up the amendment for debate. To start, I wonder if, John, you could give us an idea of how much the annual costs and capital costs would be involved in this amendment. Thank you.
So to build a new special school, we're somewhere in the region of 12 to 15 million, depends numbers, size, location, land, etc. The challenge, and I think that is something we could obviously consider as a local authority and build into our capital projections. The challenge is more going to be the revenue cost of running the school. It would cost, if we were to build a special school in the region of 120 to 150 pupils, between £3 and £4 million a year to run that school. And obviously at the moment, that's a call on the dedicated schools grant. And I've already mentioned we have a £40 million deficit on that. So Councillor Hoy, I completely take on board your challenges. I think what we want to do is look at what options there are to seek funding for this. The DFE is opening up a new round of LA-initiated free school special schools as an option. That's certainly something, when I made the commitment last time, that we continue to monitor the situation in March, that could be a suitable option. But I did want to comment on Medigate to say we are in conversation with them. It's very positively moving forward. We'd very much welcome your support because there will be a planning angle to that to move forward on that project, because that immediately will lift the pressure on that area whilst we look, and as you acknowledged, the longer term for a new school to be developed. But I think our focus has to be the here and now and how revenue-wise we can afford to run another school.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions, please? Councillor Slatter, please.
Thank you. Well, I'd certainly appreciate the words of the local member here and her concern. And, you know, I've seen it already in the short time I've been here to fight her corner, as it were. But I would hope that there's no assumption that just because people don't represent a particular area, they're not going to look after it or be concerned about it. And this is where our officers come in. We rely on their advice. And I'm sure that they don't modify that advice depending on who they're advising. So just to point that, thank you for bringing it to our attention, like you educated us on the Wisbech geography the other day. We will obviously be looking at everybody equally. And please don't assume we won't be. So yeah, we will. It's clearly a great concern that we can see this many people, this many individual children, young people in need of better provision than they're getting at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to suggest to the committee that following the input from John on the costs, both the capital and the revenue costs, that we should not consider those in isolation. They may sound big figures, but don't forget the net, I'm assuming that the net effect of the cost was you would actually reduce some of that cost because they'd be netted off against the cost of already transporting children. We've already heard about it within the agenda papers that children may be transported here into Huntingdon Insurance and special schools here. So the net effect might be, in terms of revenue cost, might be considerably less than just looking at that cost in isolation. That's the point I just wanted to make. Yep. So.
There will be some netting down. Obviously, it depends where a child currently is. If they're in a mainstream school, it's probably somewhere in the region of near double the cost, but half of it is already being funded. You're absolutely right. So I'm very happy to pull that together. I think, again, my point was, I think we need to look at this. I think it's right that we consider it. I think building a school immediately tomorrow, get it kicking off, and it's probably not the way to go, because we would rather explore the options we've got here, keep that inclusion going, and certainly continue our discussions with Medigate because they are advanced at the current time. But just to reassure Councillor Hoy, you know, my role is to make sure these children do get the provision they need, and we certainly won't let that go. And again, you know, longer term, we will continue to monitor the figures, and if the need comes, we'll come back with a paper that's very clearly articulating where we need another special school.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Three very brief questions, if I may. To the officers. First of all, perhaps it's good to hear that discussions with Medigate at an advanced stage. I wonder if you could characterise what's different in this round of negotiations versus, you know, what if these discussions have been going on for a long time, you know, what's changed now versus, say, 5 or 8 years ago. My second question would be a kind of theoretical one. What's the smallest size of special school that the officers would consider a kind of an efficient size? Because obviously, you know, you wouldn't build a school for 5 children, you would build a school for 1,000. So somewhere in between there must be a kind of minimum kind of efficient size. That would just be a helpful figure to have to hand. And finally, in 2.4 of the report, it discusses that planning permission for accommodation in Wisbech for young people with social, emotional, mental health would be determined, I think, at the end of last week. I wonder if you have an update for that on that for us. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start, and I'll ask colleagues on the Zoom call to fill in gaps if we need be. I'll start with the last question. The SEMH school, I believe, received planning last week, so that's moving ahead now, and we can commence the project to deliver that school. So that will take some of the pressure off in terms of those areas. In terms of size of a special school, our area special schools typically are over 100 in terms of their number. Because we meet multiple needs, it has to be of a certain size and scale. You know, to give you an example, there are elsewhere where we have, for instance, in Peterborough, we have specialist schools where they would be smaller because they meet one need, but we'll obviously seek to meet many needs. So I'd expect at least a minimum of 100, if not slightly larger than that. In terms of what's different, I think we have a real collegiality within our special heads group. Everyone is working together. We've been talking to them about how best we respond to the challenges of Cambridgeshire, and every special school is stepping up, and you've seen in the paper there's suggestions around extra pupils coming in, looking at how we move pupils around to get them more local. I think there's a real shared ownership of this challenge, and people wanting to work together, and certainly Medigate are well placed. It's a fantastic school, They did have a change of head teacher, new head teachers come in, and you know, she wants to work with us. And the moment we're engaging their board, who are, you know, receptive to the needs of Wisbech. And just to address Councillor Hoy's other point, we're trying to build this for the needs of our children locally. So there would be a certain level of discussion about how best we block purchase those places to meet the needs of local children in that school. Although the reality is any child can access any special school, and that's a real difficulty we have, although children from Cambridgeshire do go outside of our borders. I mentioned Peterborough, there's an autistic special school where we have, I think, 8 or 9 children accessing, and that's serving the north of the area of the county as well.
Thank you. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the local member for explaining the situation in her area. And I was wondering, in terms of if we had, say, if I understand it correctly, there would be like a free school process open. Is it possible to prioritize certain areas straight away? Because if we see like there's a clear need in Fenland, for instance, and in Wisbech area, can we actually prioritize this, or will it be open to everyone? Just more like a practical question, because I'm not aware of the process. Thank you.
Okay, it's a slightly different process to the mainstream school free school process. So in that process, a academy trust or a group of parents in the early stages would bid and say, we want to build a school there. This is a slightly different process where local authorities bid to the DFE to say, we want a free school, special school, and we'd like it there. And here's why we think it should be there. Here's the demographic details, the growth in SEND, the needs that need to be met. So we have more control over it. And obviously, you know, looking at the data, there's a clearly identified need in that area. But we want to do some more work ready for that window to open. It's one of the commitments from government that it will reopen, and there will be capital investment into SEND. So I think all things lining up, that's what we would look to push forward as our bid for Cambridgeshire to go forward. We may look at other sites as well, but you know, that sort of prioritisation for the north of the county would probably be top of our list. And very happy when that opens to come back and share our intelligence. You've seen some of the information here, but obviously what we have got is 10-year projections and details of what future need may or may not look like.
Thank you. Councillor Hay, please.
Yes. I mean, so you say you're looking to go to Department of Education to get a free school for special needs. When do you expect that will open? When can we expect something to happen?
Well, it's been announced that they will be around. What they haven't done is open the round yet. So we expect the SEND green paper to come out in March. There's an education white paper. I suspect both will reference free schools again, and I expect over the summer that round to open again. But I think what we will do, though, is if we reach the level where we think actually a special school is needed immediately, we'll come straight back to committee and say, that's what we'd like to put forward to you, and bring that forward. Obviously, the challenges are the revenue implications, the sites, the other factors behind it. But you know, we at the current time, we feel our strategy that we presented in the paper is the right way to go. And obviously, if that route opens, yes, we'll have a look at it as soon as it opens, and we'll come back to the committee with our view.
Can I just say, the parents of those 77 children waiting would say there is a need, and there is a need now.
And many of them are being found places, and you know, that's the work we're doing. That's why we're moving on it. I have to say, this is a phenomenon we've had around for a while. This is a challenging growth nationally. So you know, we're highlighting it because obviously we talked about it last time. We brought the £2.5 million capital investment to it. This is all part of the planning to deal with that need that we've identified over a period of time. So you know, yes, we're moving as quickly as we can on this. I'm meeting fortnightly with officers to talk about this project to make sure it moves quickly. So absolutely understand that.
You say you are meeting the need now by transporting the children elsewhere. The time limits, it says in here, should not exceed 45 minutes for primary and an hour and a half for secondary age children. What sort of time limits are we sending these children on transport?
So I may refer back to Claire or Joe to answer that one.
Hi, I'm not sure if we've lost Claire actually. I would, oh, are you there, Claire?
No, you go ahead.
Your transport, I think you would need to answer the lengths of time, but we generally do stick to those. There aren't children in taxis for longer than that.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and Joe's right. We do have, I think, perhaps a handful of students accessing specialist placement where it is going over the time. But by far and away, the vast majority are travelling, having their journey times within the parameters set out in our transport assistance policy.
I have to add to that sometimes we just don't have the provision in county. So we, through finding a suitable place and suitable location, we have to make that offer, and there is longer transport routes. But, providing, we simply will not be able to meet every need in county, and that's just an acceptance of the highly specialist needs that some of these children do have. And that's why longer transport does happen on a very rare occasion.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, I think part of the problem, which is no one's addressing, is the many children in mainstream primary schools that are desperate for special school places, and they're being told stay in mainstream, but it's not helping them. And I remember Peter Downs actually I was surprised, but he used to be a massive advocate of this, saying is actually we're almost setting these children up to fail. We're leaving them in a school where they aren't going to perhaps do well, and then wondering why they aren't having any good life outcomes. And so often people in Finland aren't having good life outcomes, and we're surprised. And it's no surprise to me, because if this was in Cambridge City and you had 77 people waiting for school places in a special school, I'm telling you that school will be built by next year, because we have this time and time again. Everyone talks a good talk about we care about the north of the county. When it comes to actually funding it, that we never see any money. We might see a workshop or a strategy document where we're briefly referenced and told how important we are, and a little pat on the head and off you go. But we never get anything, and there's no cost in here as to how much we're paying in transport to transport these children to Huntingdon and everywhere else in the county. Some of the school contracts, I know we're taking children miles away into Norfolk. So none of these are cheap things that we're paying out for. And so we've got no reference to know whether it's value for money to build a new school or not. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I didn't expect, so if I'm honest, I didn't expect that I would get support for this today. I understand it's committing a lot of money, but the school needs to be built at some point. The problem isn't going to go away, as you've rightly said yourself. It's going to keep increasing. And just on the Medigate point, my amendment doesn't actually preclude that. So I specifically said if Medigate doesn't go through, because of course I don't want to commit anyone to wasting taxpayers' money on a school that perhaps we might not need to pay out for. If Medigate are up for that, that's great, 100%. Let's do that. Let's go with that option. It's just about, if that doesn't happen, having a plan B, because we just can't leave these children to suffer for too long.
So I'm happy to acknowledge that, yes, we would need a plan B. Absolutely. If we couldn't deliver Medigate, we would be coming back to committee with proposals. But at the moment, what we put in front of you and what we said we would develop was that plan and offer, and that's what we tried to do. So, you mentioned transport costs and, placement and detail. That wasn't what the report was there to do. Very happy to take that away and look at it, but I think actually let us move this paper through, and then we'll come back if we are unable to deliver and meet those needs very quickly, because we're now in a situation where that's getting close to moving forward. And very happy to bring an update report next time on this report to this committee to show how things are moving on and changing and what we're delivering. We wanted to make sure you were aware of all the things we're doing, and I think you can see in the report there's a huge amount of activity and action happening, and that's the whole of the county, not just the north as well.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do just object to the sort of accusation of geographical favouritism that's being levelled. I mean, not 15 minutes ago, we approved the capital plan spend for the next 12 months, as summarised in Table 1 on page 64. And I'm looking at that and I can't see any geographical favouritism there. The projects are spread right across the county, and those are the biggest capital spends over the next 12 months. So there's no evidence has been presented to me that there is this favouritism. And if it is, then I'm sure we would all work to correct it and ensure the best outcomes for all of our pupils.
Thank you. One brief question, if I may, John, and that's the satellite programme that obviously this paper looks into. How much of that will be geared towards these children, obviously in that table in Fenland and across the county. And secondly, if I may, if we were able to put in possibly as an action point, Mashenda, to ensure that, you know, Fenland is somewhere that we will focus on in terms of working with Meadowgate, as you have already started, and to bring it back to committee if that doesn't materialise, please.
Yeah, in terms of the units around mainstream, that's part of the progression route. You know, the aspiration of keeping children locally. If I can find them a unit that meets their needs and is local, I think that's a huge benefit. You know, we run an area special school model. Let's just remember that. So we don't seek to have a special school everywhere. We seek to put them into geographical localities where they are nearby and supported. The proposal around the units are very much to link them to mainstream, to enable children still to access some mainstream provision, but equally have that specialist support. So again, you'll be seeing more proposals come through, and we'll happily share them with you when we've identified where and when and how we commission them, because I think the commissioning element is really important around this. In terms of the second point, which is around,
sorry, adding it to the action plan, having a something going forward should the Meadowgate plan not come to fruition.
Absolutely. I already think I've made that commitment already, that we're very happily bring that back. And I suggest, given the length of the debate, we'll bring an update report back to the next meeting if you're happy with that, just to show how we've progressed these areas and let you know what's happening. I think that's important. Obviously, with SEN and the government funding potentially coming through, this is a really key topic of the committee, something you're going to need to continue to engage with.
Thank you. And I'm really aware that some of the hubs that we have in our secondary schools across the county are amazing and do some really amazing work. And as you say, there are benefits to children being in mainstream and having the support that they need there. Did you want to come back, Councillor Hoy?
Just to say that with regards to the point about approving the capital programme, I think the majority of those were put in place into the capital programme before many of the councillors were even here. So it's not like we've just decided a new capital scheme today. So I don't think that's necessarily fair. Again, I think my challenge back would be, people say they're supportive, but this is now the second time that we've had a school in Fenland that we've had no support or commitment for. I've deliberately every time left it vague to allow you to actually think, how can we help this? So for example, there's no reason why it couldn't have been amended to say, and commit to building a new school. We want to try first Meadowgate, then this free school, you know, and options, and the capital programme being the last of those three options. There's so many options that could have been thought about or amendments made, but we didn't have that last time, and we're not getting that this time, and it just feels very, very, very frustrating.
Thank you. Canon Reid, please.
Thank you. The safety net funding, and I know this is tangential to what we're talking about, but of course the revenue funding will come from there. It would seem that we need to be careful not to be naive that won't come without caveats. And in other local authorities, those caveats are clearly in the form of resolving the structural nature of the deficit. Thank you. The structural nature of the deficit. I just wonder how close we are to understanding how we might, what the process is to get a better understanding of how we are going to resolve the structural deficit. Because clearly this isn't simply about removing the legacy deficit, it is the structural deficit. And I thought the paper was very helpful, but I couldn't make the numbers work to identify where that solution is going to come from.
So at the last committee, we brought in my service director report some details on the transformation programme that we've been working on. We've been working very closely with Schools Forum on that as well. Obviously, they've invested in that programme of structural change. What you're seeing in this paper is elements of it, not the whole picture. Again, probably next committee, it would be worthwhile bringing back where we are with that transformation programme and the contribution it's going to make towards sustainability. Obviously, what we don't yet know, as you quite rightly pointed out, what are the strings attached to the government money. We also don't know the level of funding we're going to receive either. So again, when we have more information, I'll happily bring that back. But you know, the work we're doing is all about trying to get in-year balance in terms of our high needs block budget. And you know, it's a moving picture because we see constant requests for assessment for education health care plans. So it's really difficult to pin that down, but we are doing lots of work to resolve that.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Hay, please.
I just wanted to ask, we need to have a timescale on these discussions with Meadowgate, because it just feels like extra provision within Fenland just keeps on getting pushed down the road. You know, we can't go on just hoping that something will come of the suggestion that Meadowgate can increase in size to accommodate these children. So what sort of timescale are you talking about coming to a conclusion with them?
Well, bear in mind that Meadowgate is an academy. It's a separate entity from the local authority. We're doing this through consensus, so I need to negotiate that with them. I can't insist on them. Obviously, if we feel it's not going to be delivered, we'll come back with another plan. But again, I'm going to suggest that I come back to the next meeting, that we're clear on where we are with that, and you know, perhaps try and address the issues that Councillor Hoy would have liked from this paper about that decision making. That wasn't the intention of this paper. This paper was here to share with you the work we're going through, the challenges we're facing, the potential projects, but happy to bring that back with timescales and moving forward. What I would warn against, though, if we don't go for that route, the timescales are significantly extended, because to find a piece of land to procure a school to go through that process, you'd be lucky to get change from 3 years. So I think actually we'll use our professional judgment to move that forward. We have a good relationship with Meadowgate. They're wanting to work with us on this, and I'll bring an update to the next meeting if that's acceptable.
I think you'll find that was the whole purpose of this amendment. We're not saying it shouldn't be at Meadowgate, but we're saying that we need to have a clear commitment that a build will take place, whether it be at Meadowgate or another location.
And I think we made that commitment that we will need to create more places. At the moment, that's our plan A, and you know, obviously there's plan B and C. So.
Thank you. I think we'll move to a vote. I will say as a personal declaration that I am determined that we get this to work for all of our students across the county, and that we add to the action plan that we will be adding this into our next meeting's agenda. Please, Rashenda. We can have a recorded vote. Is that all right, Rashenda? There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Rashenda.
So this is a recorded vote on the amendment proposed by Councillor Hoy. The amendment is to commit to build a new special school in Fenland to meet the clear need, whether that be at Meadowgate or another location. Opening date to be as soon as reasonably possible after site searches, planning and other associated factors. If I ask each member in turn, and just to clarify that cooperative members don't have voting rights on this. So Councillor Ambrose Smith.
For.
Councillor Atkins.
Against.
Councillor Boulat.
Against.
Councillor Bradnam.
Against.
Councillor Daunton.
Against.
Councillor Goodliff.
Against.
Councillor Hay.
For.
Councillor Hoy. Councillor Jonas King. Councillor Maria King.
Against.
Councillor Maguire. Councillor Prentice. Councillor Sharp.
For.
Councillor Slatter.
Against.
Councillor Taylor.
Against.
The amendment's defeated.
Thank you, Rashenda. We now move to the substantive recommendation, and any questions or debate on this, please, committee. Councillor Maguire.
Chairman, I wonder if I could ask John if he could just give me an update on our arrangements with children with special needs. I think if I read the paper rightly, and apologies if I've misunderstood it, that if there isn't, if a child's needs can't necessarily be, and it's decided can't be accommodated in a mainstream school, then we will try to obviously accommodate them in the nearest special school. it's often assumed that we want to keep, just as we do with children in care in county. But what happens when, in fact, the nearest school to a child is actually in another local authority? And I'm going to give you, if I may, if you indulge me, a personal example. I have a granddaughter who is now 22, but most of her education was spent at Spring Common School here in Huntingdonshire because she had a special that special need. For much of her school life, she actually lived in the village of Fassett, which as you know, I represent, and is just on the outskirts of Peterborough. But she was one of those children who was taxied around the county. In fact, one of her skills was to know just about every village, every street and every village, because they were picking up children around the county, mainly the northwest of, of the area, including this area. Because despite the fact that at that time, well, although we didn't have quite as close links with Peterborough as we have enjoyed over the last few years, but there was a school quite close to her in Peterborough, but it's a different authority. So she had to travel from the edge of Peterborough, just outside Stanground, for those of you who know it, all the way here into Huntingdon, which in itself, as a crow flies, wasn't terribly far, but because she had to travel in this taxi, and it was one of those that took a good hour or so. And I just wonder whether our policy has changed in any way, so that even if there's a child in Wisbech or to the outskirts of Wisbech, but actually nearer to Peterborough, would we actually agree to send them to a Peterborough school as opposed to a Cambridgeshire one?
That's a very good question, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask Jo Headley to answer that, because she's involved with the consultation around placing children. So, Jo.
Thank you, John. Sorry, trying to get off mute. Yes, we will always look to place more locally and closer to home. As John has said, we've got a certain number of local area special schools that are in our localities within our districts. And at times you can't avoid having to transport children to certain area special schools. And again, I think John touched on the fact that in Peterborough there are specific schools, whereas we have local area which meets a whole range of SEND, of special educational needs. So yeah, we do try to keep children locally, but also that border issue, and we work well with Peterborough, so there are times that we are able to place in Peterborough schools.
Your permission, Chairman, if I could just come back to Jo. So picking that example I gave you of my granddaughter who lived in Fassett, and her needs could have been accommodated in a Peterborough school. If that had occurred today, could I have assumed that they would have considered sending her, letting her go to a Peterborough school? Is that what you're actually saying? Yeah. So in a sense, our policy probably has changed. In the last 15 years. Yeah. See,
yes, you would hope so. Yes, we do our best. Yes.
Thank you.
I think the other thing to build in is that parents now have a greater say. I think
they
going
do.
Back 15 years or so, it was a very different context that we worked within, and it was often a child will go there as opposed to let's talk to the parents and engage them with the decision making.
It's good to hear, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the proposed response to the needs for additional provision 2.5. We're talking about block purchasing of places, a new independent secondary school specialising in SEMH for boys and girls. This is meant to be due to be opening in Huntingdonshire in September of this year. Can you give me some more information on that? So is it an independent provider or is it an independent school? And whereabouts in Huntingdonshire is this?
My understanding is this is in St Ives, and it's an independent school, so independent of the maintained sector, and we will purchase a number of places to meet need.
Okay, so it is an actual independent school. Okay, thank you. Is it okay, Chair, if I ask another question? There is no mention of Samuel Pepys expansion. Obviously, this is in the capital programme, but within this paper, there is no mention of it, unless I've missed it.
you're right, it's not in the paper, but that is part of the expansion program. So it is already included in our understanding of places. But I don't think that's going to generate us any more places. I think we're already at capacity, and I think that would just improve the quality of the accommodation arrangements there. But Joe or Claire, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Hi, yes, I think that may well have been missed out. I would need to go back to look at my notes, but we're absolutely looking there at expansion. Apologies, I'd have to go back and look at some of my notes. Claire, have you got any updates?
Yes, there are absolute plans for expansion. It also relates to some neighbouring land that we would need to purchase to facilitate that, and unfortunately there have been some hiccups along the way in terms of that process, so that is taking slightly longer than we would have wanted, but it is still very much within our sights, and I think we may even, I don't know actually if Ian wants to come in here, but I think we may even be slightly, may have to amend our project for that expansion to take account of the hiccup with the land issue, so that we can press on with it in some way and not lose too much time on it.
Thank you both. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yes, just on 2.3.4, when we're talking about the travel assistance policy and the distances, we don't seem to have a separate distance for SEND children, and I believe that we need to think about that, because I don't think it's comparable if you have a child with severe special educational needs travelling a distance. Often there's perhaps misunderstanding of car use, or have to have a passenger assistant, so it's quite stressful to go on a long car journey. The reason I mention that as well is because when we're talking about this new provision in St Ives, to send a child from Friday Bridge to St Ives, 1 hour and 5 minutes, Wisbech to St Ives, 1 hour. So as per our policy, well, we've got, if it's a secondary age child, it's 75 minutes, so we'll be just within policy. Is it really acceptable to make a child with special needs stay in a car for 1 hour and 10 minutes each way every day? It doesn't sit right with me. I don't feel like it's acceptable. I'll abstain on the policy, because I feel like overall there's a lot of good points in here, but I just can't support the policy, bearing in mind that it's not what I think is the right thing to do. Now we've not got the Fenland Extra School. I just can't, in all good conscience, vote to send children for an hour and 10-minute taxi ride. I just can't do it.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Yeah, I'll be really quick, because I wanted to raise a similar point actually. I find it exhausting enough to commute to work an hour each way, let alone send a child 75 minutes, or as we've heard, sometimes more. Such a long distance. I mean, it must be affecting their mental health, and also the amount of time they have to socialise as a child when they're spending so much time on the road. So yeah, I just wanted to raise a similar point. I just don't think that's really acceptable at all. Thank you.
So just briefly coming back on that, we have mapped how far children are travelling. We're looking at, could we reorganise some of where they go to school to minimise that transport? And then we'll look at gaps to see where particularly long journeys are and we don't have provisions. So we are monitoring that very closely. You've seen Claire, who leads on transport, and Joe, who leads on SEN. That is starting to be part of the discussion about a child's placement, when in the past it was, let's find a placement and then worry about the transport after. It's very much now a focus in on the whole child and what they need. So that's definitely part of the work we're doing.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
I'm finding it really difficult to cope with all these the shifting sands of SEND. I know when I first got elected, we're soon made aware of the problems with the budget and the problems with funding, and how funding comes in later than we would want it to be for individual children. So I try to work out why we have such an increase in young people identified to have special needs of one sort or another. And how this actually compares with the situation from Councillor Maguire's granddaughter's day. I mean, are we actually diagnosing sooner? And sometimes that can be very beneficial. As I remember, we had a discussion about autism preschool diagnosis actually helping. So sometimes the early diagnosis and early help in a mainstream school or even before it can almost take some of those children out of the system because they no longer have special needs that register on the criteria. We do perhaps have some greater occurrence. This may be something to do with the survival of some children who would not have survived otherwise. I know we have a cluster in Cambridge associated with more medical conditions, but often these aren't unrelated to cognitive conditions as well. Are these numbers rising because of speed of referral? Now that is something I rather hope is happening. And to try and cut a long story short, I'd like to just home it down on, I would hope that we're not sending out a message to schools that they should try and fob parents off getting an ACHP, because then that gets them onto the books as unresolved need. But if on the other hand, we almost want to speed that process up so that we can say to the central government that we have this many, is there any way in which playing the system is something we are wanting to do, or is it something that is actually not in the child's interest, and so we certainly don't want to do it? I'd like to know as a counsellor, if I have a parent coming along with child with, they're not concerned, they're concerned about whether they're learning enough at school. At the moment, I'm advised to make sure that they get an ECHP as soon as possible, or get into the process even prior to that, which might mean the early help really helps. Or am I, as a member of this council, wanting to make sure we get plenty of funding from central government sooner than later?
So our focus is absolutely on children's needs and meeting those needs, and process or not, that's the most important thing. That I think we have seen a substantial increase. I think complexity of need is what's causing us the most issues. So things like birth survival rates, increased diagnosis, which is good. We are identifying those needs is our biggest challenge. The previous paper we brought was all around being proactive, doing things early. So I welcome that we've seen a quite large increase in the amount of education, health and care plans in early years, because actually we're supporting children early, and you hope you can de-escalate those needs because you're addressing the challenges and working through. I think our focus, though, needs to be on that prevention side and early intervention. So you may or may not be aware, there's a category called SEND support, where schools can identify special education needs before they get through the assessment process, work with those children, get the support they need early. If the need is still there, yes, we will refer them through. But at the moment, the numbers coming through are significant. Our EP teams are fully supporting the statutory process. At the moment, we can't do any early intervention work, but that's a national challenge we face. But just to summarise, we have to meet the children's needs. That's the most important thing. And I think there's no explicit game playing anything. It's all about children and their needs.
Thank you. Unless there's anything else, I think we'll move to the vote on the substantive recommendation. Co-opted members are eligible to vote on this original officer recommendation. So we're being asked to approve the approach set out in the report for increasing the number of places offering special educational provision for children and young people with EHCPs or educational health care plans.
That's why they weren't allowed to vote before, what the difference is.
Would you like to clarify that, Rashonda?
Yeah, the amendment that you had moved related would have required capital expenditure, and co-opted members aren't eligible to vote on capital programmes and capital expenditure.
Could I just have sorry, could I make a comment on that? I would like it to be on the record that the chair and Richenda are establishing the facts around who can and cannot vote with co-option, because currently we don't feel comfortable that that is clear enough.
Thank you. We are looking into clarification from that and waiting further clarification, but thank you, Andrew.
Important regarding the co-option, because it's my understanding that when we had the Wisbech school discussion, that the co-opted members were told that they were not allowed to vote, and had they been able to vote, it would have materially changed the decision. And so I'm actually very concerned about this issue, because it never used to be the case that co-opted members couldn't vote. They used to all be able to vote on education matters. It was then changed by the Constitution recently, which I feel it was changed just so people had a benefit in terms of voting numbers. But I'm very uncomfortable that we're making a number of decisions on this committee and we aren't clear as to whether people are allowed to vote or not. And these are big, serious decisions that people are voting on.
I think just to clarify, the change that was made to the Constitution was to better reflect the guidance that we work to, which is the direction from the Department for Education. So it was existing guidance, it was just making that more clear and actually reflecting exactly the wording within that guidance. Certainly, I know Andrew, as he said, has raised that as a point, and we have made contact with the Department for Education to seek clarification on that. So obviously we will bring that sort of to you, but we are working from the best advice we have at the moment.
Thank you. If I read the recommendation again, so it's to approve the approach set out in the report for increasing the number of places offering special education provision for children and young people with education, health and care plans who are currently awaiting placement. All those in favour, please. Thank you. All those against? And abstentions, please. Thank you. Rashenda, when you're ready.
That's a majority in favour.
Thank you, Rashenda.
Could we hear the numbers, please, Chair? Thank you.
It was 8 votes in favour and 9 abstentions.
Thank you, Rashenda. As we are over the 2 hours, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I hope we're ready to restart. Item 10. So item 10 is the Cambridgeshire Holiday Voucher Scheme. This report is introduced by Jonathan Lewis, the Service Director for Education. And as part of his title, it's now also Holiday Voucher Scheme Director, because I know he personally does an awful lot of this scheme, but also is supported by some amazing officers of the county. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. The last full council, there was an agreement to earmark £3.6 million of reserves to contribute towards the continuation of the voucher scheme. The government household support grant has now ended, and obviously the aspiration has been to continue to support those families throughout the next financial year and to allocate vouchers between now and February 2023. And the paper covers the proposal. We are using the same scheme in terms of allocation. There will be a slight adjustment to represent the fact that Cambridgeshire is probably the only authority locally, we don't know that yet, that will be running a scheme. So particularly, and looking towards Councillor Maguire, those young people that move into other areas to access education, we would look to seek them out and allocate them a voucher so they don't lose out just because they access education in a neighbouring authority. And the paper lays out those arrangements, the cost of running that scheme, and also the procurement route that we're intending using to award the voucher provider for that scheme. So I won't go into any more detail, just happy to take any questions on the proposals and the recommendations that I've presented in the paper.
Thank you. I haven't briefed you on this, so you might have to do it from memory. Do you have any comments from parents and carers who've used the scheme, please?
As you said, I get quite involved with this. So one of the things I've been doing in the last few weeks is finding old vouchers that haven't been claimed and sending them out to parents. We have to send them via email and approach them and ask them whether they want them still. And the amount of comments I get back saying, I'm really struggling, I need help. The other scheme, that the wider household support grant, is now ended, and actually that difference one voucher makes just for the holidays, just for that short period of time, is immense. And we must have had probably 200 emails back from those parents that we've made a difference to say thank you for what we're doing and the difference it does make. So I think universally this is a very important part of what we do, and particularly I think we get the most comments around the longer holidays, so the summer holiday, the Easter holidays, when parents struggle more to provide that lunch for those children. So I think it makes a huge difference, and certainly the feedback suggests that too.
Thank you. Any comments or questions, please? Alex Boulat.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really welcome this, and it has made, as John said, a real difference to families and residents in my area, as it has in the whole of the county. I had a question about outreach in the next rounds of comms as well on this scheme, because what I'm always wondering is who is this scheme not reaching yet and who is not claiming their entitlement for this. And of course, those are people for whom this will make a real difference as well. And often I come across one or two residents and I have to let them know that this exists and like send them your way. And the team has been really responsive, but obviously I don't know what I don't know in the local area. There in the report, there's a point saying that you'll produce more translated materials for parents. And I'm aware you already did some translated letters and other comms as well. So I was wondering, has this approach been working well? Did you manage to reach actually groups that you haven't reached before in previous rounds? And what are, I guess, the priorities in terms of which groups do you really want to, I guess, target with the comms and reach out in the next round of this? Thank you.
I thank you for your help. The translated letters have made a difference. We've also tried to use different sources of accessing parents. So I'm like a boy in a toy shop at the moment, because we're able to send text messages out to chase people. We've got a new system that enables us to do that. So the percentage of unclaimed vouchers has gone down from somewhere in the region of 6% that were unclaimed, and we're going to be around 3% this time. Groups wise, early years parents are harder to reach. I think we have less contact with them. We have less day-to-day intelligence because we don't access directly a system at the moment. The schools one I could go in and look up straight away where a parent is, if their phone numbers have changed or anything like that. We struggle with early years, but we've now got a process with our settings where we check that. In terms of groups that we're struggling to reach, definitely where English isn't the first language is still a concern. And those that are digitally disadvantaged, we are picking up some of those areas. So one of the things I'm going to look at this time is looking at other routes around, can we get vouchers out in a different way? So we haven't posted out any vouchers, have delivered some where we've got absolutely desperate to do that, but we're going to look at different routes of getting them out. And certainly what we are doing now is where parents are struggling, we're downloading the vouchers for them, we're emailing them, so they don't even have to use the system, it comes straight into their inbox. So I think there's work to be done. So the translated materials, the community engagement, the fact that will not be many other opportunities as family, we will make sure that's well publicised and worked through.
Thank you. Councillor Ambrose Smith, please.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for this. Without wishing to dampen your enthusiasm, is recommendation C really required? I ask that because it's over the over the 500,000 limit, and she did not come back to committee at because it's going to be about £3.6 million. I would have thought that you'd just get away with A and B and just get on with it. And you've got the okay from us here at this particular point. Sorry, Chair, seems wrong.
Well, you agree. I think I have to follow certain processes, and that's what we've tried to cover here. I think the way we work and the provider we use is very effective. To change it would be hugely disruptive, and of course I'd come back and talk to the chair and vice chair, but we will get on with it. We haven't got much choice. Time is running out and we need to get on with it rapidly. So the recommendations in there obviously to meet the requirements of procurement.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Are we promoting this through our children and family centres, as obviously within sort of school settings and ones that aren't within school settings?
We have obviously what we do is that for every parent that is entitled in early years, they get an email from me the day before saying you're going to get a voucher tomorrow and this is what you need to do. So we have a very direct contact with the people that need it. The piece of work that I'm really keen to do here is capitalise on this opportunity while we still got a scheme to dangle a carrot in front of parents to say, please sign up for early years pupil premium, 2-year-old funding, or the schools pupil premium, because that brings additional capacity and benefits. So I will be looking at a strategy of getting more of that information out, explaining what, we do have a lot of issues with parents not understanding what early years pupil premium and 2-year-old funding is and the difference between the two, because there's a different income threshold between the two as well. So I am intending doing more work. We will put something simple out into the community. We will make sure you get QR codes like you had previously and find as many ways as we can to try and bridge that gap. But certainly in terms of getting into early years families, there's a direct contact from me the night before they go out to make sure they're aware they're getting a voucher, and they will get a text from me this year as well, which is different from previous years.
Councillor Daunton and then Councillor Bradman, please. Thank you.
Yes, I think actually if you think about the current situation that we're facing worldwide and the impact that's going to have on prices, this scheme is even more urgent and needed than ever, I would have thought.
Councillor Bradman.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask to what extent this scheme is being promoted amongst Gypsy and Roma and Traveller communities in our divisions. And for example, are the Traveller liaison officers promoting it to them? And if not, please give me information quickly and I will buzz around my local area with information. If you have, because we have a lot of people where English is not their first language as well, coincidentally cohabiting on the same sites. So if we've got information that we can do, can we have it, please?
So I'm sure you're sick to death of my emails on a Friday evening. That will be included in one of those updates with the information, so you'll have that. I've also been working with the district council chief execs, so they've been getting copies of the correspondence too. And we also work through our attendance team with electively home educated parents, which a proportion of the GRT community do access, particularly at secondary age, and that letter goes out through that route as well. So we do try and get out there, but if you've got good routes in, very happy to receive that information, and I'll pass the details through to them when it's complete. Obviously, we haven't quite written it yet, so we're waiting for today to get out of the way, and we'll make sure that's available with plenty of time to get out.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just come back on that. Thank you, Jonathan. Not all of our traveller parents are confident readers, so we actually need people to go and talk to them. And I'm just wondering whether the traveller liaison officers have done that at all. I mean, I'm happy to do that, but I can't do all of it. So, we need people to assist us and maybe come out as a group. I know there's not much time left now, but if we could, that would be helpful. If we could arrange to do that as a group.
Very happy. If you could point me in the right direction, we'll make sure that happens. Equally, I think one of the things we have talked about this time is doing some videos as well, social media, explaining what it is that we're doing and how they access it, because I completely agree some of the barriers are there through reading, so absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. So we have the 3 recommendations for this report, which are A, to agree the scope and operation of the Cambridgeshire Holiday Voucher Scheme, B, to agree to utilise up to £3.6 million earmarked for this purpose by full council in order to fund the Cambridgeshire Holiday Voucher Scheme during 2022-23. And for absence of doubt, that's the financial year, not the calendar year, nor the school year. And C, to agree that the Service Director for Education may, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee and the Head of Procurement, award a contract for the voucher scheme using RM 6255 for the Household Support Grant. With those in favour, please raise their hands. And I think that's unanimous. Thank you, Rashenda. Thank you. So item 11. Item 11 is the Finance Monitoring Report for January 2022. This report is introduced remotely by Martin Wade, the Strategic Finance Business Partner. Over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you. So very briefly, there's not been too many significant changes since the last report.
Martin, I'm really sorry, but our link isn't brilliant. Could we try without the video? Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so yeah, so not too many significant changes from the last report to the committee, but just a couple of areas I'd like to highlight. So we're now reporting a bottom line underspend of £464,000 compared to the £485,000 overspend in the last reported position. The primary reason for that change is in respect of the increased underspend within children's and safeguarding, and a large portion of that is as a result of the overachievement of vacancy savings targets across the service. And that's due to a combination of the difficulty in recruiting to social worker posts and also posts becoming vacant, with recruitment vacancies taking longer than anticipated in the current climate. So that's obviously added a significant level of underspend in that particular area. The other area I really want to draw attention to was in respect of home to school transport budgets, and we've rephased some of the forecasts across the special, mainstream and children in care transport budgets to more closely reflect the latest commitment records held by the service. As per some of the early items, obviously there are continued pressures within the special sector, and the increase in the forecast overspend there aligns with the rise in the education, health and care plans we're seeing elsewhere. However, in the mainstream budget, we have seen an increase in the underspend. We're now reporting £500,000 underspend on the mainstream budgets, and that's due to a combination of more efficient route planning and updated contracts for some routes, which have delivered that underspend in year. I think John's already spoken about the kind of the pressures on the high needs block, so I won't talk about those in any specific detail, but just to say again, the dedicated schools grant high needs block pressure has increased again slightly, and we're now looking at an in-year position of around 14.8 million on that particular area. So they're the 3 main areas I just wanted to highlight. So any questions I'm happy to take.
Thank you, Martin. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just really homing on one area which you just touched on, Martin, the children and safeguarding. it's moved from a 2.755 million underspend to 3.9. And the biggest movement is from 900,000 to 2 million on strategic management, children and safeguarding. You say that's vacancies, but that's a lot of vacancies in there, I would have said. That seems a large figure. The others haven't moved too much, although there are still obviously a number of vacancies around. I mean, changing it slightly is, how are we performing, or what measure do we have that the way we're performing with that level of vacancies within the directorate?
Okay, just touch on the vacancies, and I'll probably then have to hand over to service colleagues to answer the second part. So yes, so effectively, I think we've touched on this before, but in terms of vacancies, we build in an assumption on each of these service areas about the level of turnover of staff that we're actually going to see in year. You're right, the level of vacancies is probably unprecedented at the moment in terms of what we're seeing. I think the target across children's safeguarding is around £1 million, and I think we're probably closer to around £3 million in terms of the level of vacancies that we're looking at the moment. As I said, there are a number of reasons for that, and including some of the posts have been kept vacant prior to consultation because of planned restructures. But I don't know if Nicola is available to make any more comments on the kind of impact that's actually having on service delivery.
Thank you, Martin. Oh, that's very loud. Thank you, Martin. Yes, so it is a combination of two things. We have been holding some posts for consultations, and we haven't been able to progress on those, but there is clearly difficulty in terms of recruiting qualified social workers. So we aren't having difficulty in recruiting to other posts in early help and social care, and it's important, I think, to stress that it is a particular area where there is, I think everybody knows, a national shortage of children's social workers, and that is affecting Cambridgeshire significantly at the minute. We are monitoring that very carefully. We have a new recruitment campaign that has been out and is starting to show some impact, and I think if committee remembers, you also supported us in moving forward with a specialist agency social work recruitment plan to try and support our permanent staff as well. So we are taking various measures to address it, but we would absolutely recognise that it is a concern at the minute, and one that we are equally concerned about.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. We just heard on the paper two items ago about increasing special needs and those sort of children. Obviously, with a vacancy level that high, what strain is that putting on the current existing staff? Because presumably their workload, because of the number of children, may be increasing, and obviously we've got less people to run it. Are we looking after those staff? I'm sure we are, but it's obviously one area that we need to seriously consider the strain of what they're trying to do.
Absolutely, and I think staff would really appreciate that's one of the committee's considerations. We're very conscious. It's been a very long and difficult couple of years for everybody in the public sector, and social care staff, early help staff are just as tired as everybody else. We are very carefully managing the flow of work. We have recalibrated some of the work that we've put through to services, and we are being very careful about that. Caseloads are a bit higher than we would like, and I can't say they're not, but we have very dedicated managers who are trying to offer a lot of support to staff at the moment, and we are working on, we have retention plans and progression schemes that I think are helping staff to feel more valued at the moment, but it is difficult for them. We recognise that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? No. So we've been asked to review and comment on the report, which we have done. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Item 12. Item 12 is the establishment of a new primary school at Sawtrey. Claire Buckingham, Strategic Educational Place Planning Manager, rejoins us remotely to present this report. Thank you, Claire.
Hello, I'll leave my camera off to help with the connection. So the need for a new primary school at Sawtry is driven by planning approval for 3 large developments in that village, totaling over 700 new homes. And under the free school presumption process, we launched a competition last September to seek an academy sponsor to establish and run that new school. There was a high level interest, which was pleasing. 5 multi-academy trusts applied and 3 were shortlisted. And on the 13th of January, an assessment panel comprising officers and members, including members around the table here at this meeting, interviewed the 3 shortlisted trusts. The panel's recommendation to the committee is that it should endorse Cambridge Meridian Academies Trust as the council's preferred sponsor. The full reasons are set out in section 2.7 of the report, but just to highlight some of the key strengths of CMAT's proposals. They have appropriate experience and expertise to run this new primary school, and that's been further enhanced because they've recently merged with Cambridge Primary Education Trust, which is a very successful local primary specialist MAT with a track record of excellence in delivering primary education, and it has one of the only teaching school hubs in Cambridgeshire. CMAT's very well established in the community. It fully understands the profile of that community and the education landscape in the village. And the trust is also responsible for the junior school and the secondary school there. And finally, they have a very strong track record in improving achievement and attainment across schools in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. And they provided the selection panel with strong and credible evidence that the new free school will add high quality places into that local area. So following the committee decision today, the next steps after that will be for the Regional Schools Commissioners Advisory Board to decide which potential sponsor he will recommend to the Secretary of State to run the school. We've been advised just a few days ago after the papers were printed that advisory board meeting will actually consider this on the 28th of April, not on the 24th of March as we'd originally expected and which we'd quoted in the paper. But it does mean we will have a final decision as to who that new sponsor will be shortly after Easter.
Thank you, Claire. Before I open this report to debate by committee, we will hear the views of Councillor Simon Bywater, who is the local member for Sawtry and Stilton. Councillor Bywater had hoped to join us in person today to share his views, but has been unable to do so. He has, though, shared his comments in writing, and these have been circulated to committee members in advance. And I'll ask the Democratic Services Officer to read them again now for the benefit of those members of the public and press watching this meeting. Thank you, Rashenda.
Councillor Bywater writes, I would like to thank the Council for involving me as the local member in this selection process to find a new sponsor for the new primary school in Sawtry. It's clear to me that this was a very well run process by the Council. I would like to pay particular thanks to the officers who carried out this task with the utmost professionalism. I would also like to thank the Chair, Councillor Goodliffe, and Councillor Simone Taylor for taking the time to be on the selection interview panel. We had some very strong trusts taking part on the day, and it proved to be a very thorough interview process. I support the recommendations made to the CYP committee in the report and hope that the committee can do the same and approve CMAT as the preferred sponsor for the new primary school at Sawtry. I look forward to monitoring the progress of this new school.
Thank you, Rashenda, and thanks to Councillor Bywater. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Cannon Reid, please.
Thank you. I too would like to say I thought that it was a great example of how local government decision making on local issues is a powerful force, and I hope the RSC decision making will recognise that. My question is relating to page 156, 2.7. There's promise 3, which surrounds the need to consult with local schools in the gap between the school developing and being full, and at that point where it can represent a threat to other schools. I ask this question because there are a number of local, rural, very small primary schools in that vicinity. This is not said in the context of any opposition to the school, because clearly the Sawtry does need a new primary school to represent a good solution to that problem. But the question is, can I have reassurance that the consultation will not just be the infant school and other schools in CMAT?
Thank you. Claire or John?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Reid, which paragraph were you referring to?
Page 156, 2.7, bullet point 3. It's a promise to consult with other schools on the PAN in the opening phase of the school as it grows, because it's growing incrementally, isn't it? From
yeah.
So Claire, do you want me to come in on this? So
okay.
one of the conversations we had as part of the panel was to consider the impact on other schools. What we've agreed provisionally with CMAT as part of this is that there will be an agreement about how we manage that release of spaces, the impact it will have both on the infant school within Sawtry, because obviously that's a key component of it, the junior school, which they already run, and obviously the rural schools in the local area. So I think there's a clear agreement. It's something we want to formalise in a written way to manage this growth. What it does say in the papers, if you've seen them, is that they're relatively small numbers each year, and that's been done explicitly to manage that arrangement. Obviously, we'll have space, so we can vary that, but equally, we don't want to put another school at risk by opening this too quickly, and that's an explicit agreement of the trust by signing up for these arrangements.
And can I just say thank you for that, because I think that's a lesson that we've learned through other processes, which is going to be very beneficial.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Chairman, could I just have confirmation that the community college, Sawtry Community College, would, I don't know if they're a consultee, but you're content that the capacity, they will have the capacity in the future, as this will clearly be one of the feeder schools. That been changed?
Yeah, there's sufficient capacity at the school. We've done some work there. There's been a new block built. Obviously, we're working with CMAT that run the secondary school as well. So there is a good understanding of how we manage numbers, but there is sufficient secondary provision in the local area.
Thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, we're being asked to endorse Cambridge Meridian Academies Trust as the council's preferred sponsor for the new primary school at Sawtry. I think I've heard no objections unless anyone wants to wave at me now. No, so we'll take that as approved unanimously. Thank you. So item 13. Item 13 is the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee Annual Report for 2020-2021. Nicola Curley is joining us in the room, not remotely, although it's a long way away, to introduce this report. Nicola is well known to the committee, but this is the first meeting since her appointment as our new Acting Director of Children's Services, and I'd like to offer her our congratulations on her appointment, and also to thank both the previous and current members of the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee for their work. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll hand over to Councillor Bradnam at the start as the chair of the subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And thank you, members. I'm very pleased to put forward this report from the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee. And I will point out that a foreword that should be in this report will be added shortly from me. So I apologise that that wasn't in there. And I'm very pleased with the work that the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee's done. We've had a difficult year, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling because I've ended up with some information in the wrong place in my feed. Here we are. There we are. I'm very mindful that our staff and officers have had a really difficult time over the last 2 years, and I think they have done an excellent job. Many of the data that we see here in the report are improvements on previous years. For example, I'm really glad to see that the Cambridgeshire Children in Care are getting a similar percentage of initial health assessments within the first 20 days as our statistical neighbours. That is an improvement on the past, so our staff have worked hard to bring that up. And I'm also glad to see the increase in the number of in-house foster carers, which is key to us being able to deliver placements for our children in this county. We can't always do that, and sometimes we don't want to do that for reasons of child safety, but I think we're doing a great job on that. So I'll hand over to Nicola to read further detail into it, but thank you very much, members, and I recommend this to you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll just very quickly just alert you to the changes. So the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee itself has also had a little bit of a difficult year because it's gone from virtual to in-person, back to virtual, cancelled a couple of meetings, and has had changes. So Councillor Bradnam and Councillor Slatter as Vice Chair took over in July and have made sterling efforts, I think, to continue the council despite those despite those difficulties. And we have now split the subcommittee into themed meetings. So we have health, education and placement. And then we try and wrap reports around those themed areas. And we have alternating formal and informal meetings. And I think the really, really positive change is that the informal meetings involve young people from the Children Care Council coming to the meetings, and we're building that. It's been problematic because of the virtual bit. I think Councillor Randall and Councillor Slatter would agree, but we are almost there with that now. And we do have a couple of very vocal young people who join regularly. And I think we can see that's moved on massively. There are some outcomes in the report on page 207, but it's mostly around positive feedback for workers, around training for members. And we have recently, the last committee also wrote to NHS England with some of their concerns around health assessments out of area and dental provision. So I'll stop there if there's any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Hay, please.
Yes, on page 208 of the report, I'm having difficulty getting my head around the numbers. On the top of the report, it says we've got 664 children in care. And then further on down, it splits it between the number of female children and the number of male children. But those two numbers together only come to 636. And similarly, in the chart below that, it says March 21, we had 664 children, and that's split between 607 non-unaccompanied children and 63 unaccompanied children, which makes 670. I would have expected those figures to come to 664.
And so would I. So I suspect what's happened is that they've been pulled at slightly different times and the numbers of children in care can change regularly. I'll go back and go through it and make sure those are corrected. Obviously, I apologise, Councillor Hay.
Councillor King, please.
Thank you. And thanks for the report, Anna and Nicola. Just wanted to ask Nicola, on page 214, I think, or depending where you look, 210, we look at protected characteristics ethnicity in this case. My question is, do we know if any ethnic groups are overrepresented amongst children in care? So we have 80% as white children. What is the percentage of white children, or what is overall our kind of overall population percentages of that? So we can appreciate whether there is any specific ethnic group, for example, which is overrepresented in this category or underrepresented as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. So there is, I was just looking as you were talking, there is a chart on page 210, which I think breaks down quite helpfully the overall ethnicity of children. There is a slight, as in many other areas, slight bias in terms of the number of mixed heritage children. And we usually have a slightly over representation of mixed heritage children. I'm just trying to look because my colours aren't very good. And I think in this instance, let me have a look, Black and Black British children is slightly overrepresented. It isn't as, I think it has improved slightly over time, but there is still a slight overrepresentation. And if we go further back in the social care journey, if you like, we know that we have an overrepresentation of Black and Black British children in our Section 47s, for example, our child protection investigations. So we know we're drawing more children into the system at the earlier stages, and then that will ultimately reflect in our children in care population. So we are doing a piece of work looking at that. and trying to understand what that's about a bit more, because obviously that's a partnership piece of work. It's not just us that obviously we don't refer the children in. So we're doing some work to look at that so that there is a slight overrepresentation. Yes.
Okay, thank you. If I may, I've got the other question is looking at the missing incidents and missing children chart, and the number of children in care missing incidents shows a sharp increase in March 21 from 40 to 70. Is there any kind of, sorry, 40 being the starting point in April 2020? Anything you could kind of comment on here?
So I think that may relate to some of the changes in the lockdown and the pandemic. I can't remember exactly, but I know we saw significant spikes and changes as lockdowns ended and there was more freedom for young people. It's also very much affected by the weather. So if it was a nice period, it does spike. I'm afraid it is that basic. But Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. Yes. My recollection when we queried this at the time was that it also related to the time when children were sent home from school because of the pandemic, and so there was less school surveillance, as it were, and so that was harder to manage. That was my recollection of a factor in it.
I guess my question would be, and I know that's not covered by the time in this report, has that discrepancy now sort of remedies itself back to a more level number of these occurrences?
So it is quite seasonal, so it does still go up and down. It is actually quite a small number of children. So just to reassure you, incidents and children are not the same. So we do have a very small number of young people who go missing very regularly, and they tend to inflate the figures. And missing is also a slightly relative term. So for some children, they will be reported missing formally an hour after they've gone because of our level of concern about them. Other children, it might not be until, they haven't come home at 2 o'clock in the morning or something. So it does change, but it is generally seasonal. I think, if the head of corporate parenting was here now, she would say that actually it's much better managed and it has settled, it is settling again. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please. Sorry, I've got Councillor Slatter. Councillor Daunton, please.
I have a question relating to the charts on page 214, criminal exploitation and I guess CSE as sexual exploitation. Yeah. So the figures given here are for the end of March 2021. How do those figures differ from previous years? What's been the shift, if any, in previous years? And in the comparison of the two tables, I assume that the higher incidence of male criminal exploitation might be related possibly to county lines, and also the higher incidence of female exploitation might also have some relationship to human trafficking, if you could shed any light on that.
Of course. So I prefaced by saying these are again very small numbers. So just to reassure people, I think you're absolutely right. There is still a gender bias in that young women tend to be more often sexually exploited than young men, but we do have a significant number of, small number of young men who are sexually exploited. It is around county lines. It is around more serious youth violence for young men, particularly. In general trends, and I can provide more detailed information separately if the committee would like, but in general terms, we would see that criminal exploitation has gone up, which we would see as a positive, sort of a positive. Obviously, we'd like there to be none, but what we've been working on is the identification of it, and it was something that wasn't readily identified. So child sexual exploitation is quite well known now in the professional network, and people understand what they're looking for, and has actually probably leveled off a bit because we have very effective mechanisms in place. criminal exploitation is a newer phenomenon and is still quite difficult, I think, sometimes for professionals to identify. So we had worked quite hard on increasing identification and numbers, really. So it has definitely gone up, but some of that is a positive.
Thank you. And then the question about how things have changed over time, because you've got the instance of missing children over a number of years. Have things shifted over the last several years?
That one is quite difficult because the way missing has changed a lot over time. So you didn't used to collect statistics at all on missing children. We then had something that was called absent. Oh, right, okay. So on the report, you mean? So like I said, I'll happily provide a separate briefing. I think they were just trying to give you a snapshot really of where things were at the time. Yeah.
Canon Reid, please.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Bullet point 1 on the first page, 206, refers to the virtual school. I just wanted to pass comment. I chair the virtual school management board. I just wanted to pass comment on how important the corporate parenting governance link is between that body and this committee and the corporate parenting board, currently represented through Councillor Bellat. And over a long period of time, that link has proven to be extremely important. I also just wanted to say, as a consequence of all of that, it is, I think we've seen a step change in recent years of the amount of investment and capacity that we have to deal with increasing levels of really complex problems, as apparent in the report. And I think that's a great testament to the investment that the local authority are making at the moment to this area.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments, anyone? No? So with this one, we've been asked to note the content of the report and raise any questions with the lead officer, which we have done. Thank you. Item 14. Item 14 is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Safeguarding Children Partnership Board Annual Report for 2020-2021. We're joined remotely by Joe Proctor, who is the Head of Service for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Safeguarding Partnership Boards, who will briefly introduce this report. Over to you, Joe.
She's not with us at the moment. We're trying to get hold of her, Chair. Can I suggest perhaps you might want to take the next item and then we'll come back to Joe.
Sorry? Yeah, if Joe doesn't appear, I might ask you, Nicola, to talk to this one, but in the interim, to give you 2 minutes to read the report through and make notes. The other item on today's agenda is the committee agenda plan and appointments. And Rishenda, could you report any changes to the published agenda plan, please?
There are no changes to that published plan, Chair.
Thank you. And looking at the committee appointments, we're being asked to consider whether to appoint a representative to the advisory group for Anglia Ruskin University's Nature for Everyone project. The advisory group isn't due to start work until 2023, but the project team would welcome some input now on the scope of the project as a funding bid is being prepared. Details of this project have been circulated to committee members and included in the published papers, and we have received one expression of interest to date from Councillor Boulat. Thank you, Councillor Boulat. Would any other members of the committee like to be considered for this role? No, in which case we would like to nominate Councillor Boulat for that one. And Charlotte, please.
Just to introduce the safeguarding, just to introduce the safeguarding report. Happy for me to do that now? Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Councillor Slatter, did you want to talk on the previous agenda? item.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was just to draw attention I know there's this ongoing vacancy in SACRE, Standing Advisory Committee on Religious Education. I quite understand if there aren't anybody, there's nobody else in the Conservative group with the time to do that. But just to mention something that I've been learning, and so has Councillor Bulap, as new members of SACRE, it is, religious education has changed tremendously, and the importance of it to our society in general, in terms of it, a lot of people call it worldview now, is absolutely immense in terms of social cohesion and, understanding our neighbours. And it is possible to get involved on the agreed syllabus conference. And I would urge all members to take an interest in this. It's not an esoteric thing in the corner. It is something we are responsible for as a committee and as a county in terms of the education of the young people in our school. So I would urge you to perhaps at least take an interest in the doings of SACRE, and maybe also the agreed syllabus and the related issues of corporate worship in our schools. We've all got schools, and sometimes these issues come to us as casework. So please, and it's very good to know that Councillor Prentice will be back in harness. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slatter. I think item 13, Charlotte, are you happy to introduce this one to us, unless we have Joe with us, Rashenda? Not yet. The wonders of technology. Charlotte, please.
Yes, so I'll just introduce this very briefly, and Nicola may be able to add, because she chaired her first meeting of the Safeguarding Committee, I think this week. So really we're presenting this paper to you for information. It's a statutory requirement that you receive this report, and really asking you to note the contents. It covers the period of April 20 to March 2021. So obviously quite a sort of turbulent period in terms of everything else that was going on in the world. So I think at this stage, we just ask you to note it, and also note the work that's been done on the priorities. I think if the committee, Joe was very keen, I know, to talk to you about the report, so I'm not sure where things have gone wrong. So if you did want to have a more detailed discussion, I'm sure Nicola will be able to add a little bit, but we could ask her to come back to a future meeting. But we just worry a little bit, by then the report will be too old. So it's important that you do see it, and it does come in front of you. So I don't know if Nicola, you want to add anything?
I mean, I don't think particularly, except to say that I think we've agreed, or we've recommended the continuation of the four main priorities. But I mean, I'll happily try. I did hear Joe present it elsewhere, so I'll happily try and answer. Oh,
I'm here.
There she is, just at the nick of time. So I'll stop talking and hand over to Joe.
Apologies. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Apologies, I was trying to get into Zoom, and unfortunately my ICT wasn't letting me in, so apologies for that. So thank you for inviting me to come and present our annual report. The report covers the time period from April 2020 until March 2021, so it is very retrospective. There's a statutory requirement that we produce the annual report, and the legislation stipulates what the report should cover. It was signed off in November 2021 and published on our website, and it was brought to you today for information. The report and the work of the partnership has been scrutinised by an independent scrutineer who has given us assurances that both the report and the work of the board are meeting our statutory obligations. The report contains details on the work that the partnership has undertaken between April 2020 and March 2020. Particular highlights that I'd like to draw to your attention are the work that the partnership has undertaken in terms of addressing child sexual abuse. You'll note from the report that we've consulted with both the public and practitioners to inform our work, and we had an overwhelming response, much of which demonstrated an improvement in both knowledge and understanding of both children, parents and practitioners, which was extremely positive. We've also continued our work around child exploitation, and we are now working in partnership with all of our community safety partnerships across the region, across the county, and this is ensuring a really coordinated approach. Several areas of local work that we're undertaking in child exploitation has also now been recognised as national good practice, and myself and several other people have been asked to speak on numerous national webinars about the work that we've done locally, because it's been seen to be really, really good. You'll also note that one case review was published within the timescale covered by this report. All of the recommendations were formulated in an action plan, and I can give members assurance that the action plan has been completed and signed off, and I'll now open it up for questions.
Thank you. I suspect I know the answer to this, but is there a reason it takes so long between the end of the year and the formulation of the report and obviously the publishing now? Thank you.
So some of it is governance. In terms of we have to wait until post the end of the year for statutory partners to be able to give us their updates, and often we're waiting for other agencies to be able to give us their kind of information to go into the report. And then the safeguarding boards only meet 3 times a year. So it has to go through our internal governance before it can come to yourselves. I think it was initially due to come to you at your last meeting, but I think that there was a reason why it got moved to this meeting. But I do accept it's extremely retrospective because we're about to start work on the next one.
Thank you, and I appreciate it's partly due to our agenda issues as well. Any questions or comments on this one, please? Councillor Daunton, please.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting the report. And actually, my question was to do with the remark that you've just been making. I mean, I'm very glad to hear that partners are working together well. Obviously, having a partnership, this is quite sort of complex with as many partners as this, might make for difficulties. And I think you touched on that in relation to the publication of the report. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you managed to work with the different community safety partnerships across the district, because it's one circle on here, but that's several community safety partnerships organised in very different ways.
It is, and I absolutely accept it's a challenge. The whole of my job really is networking in terms of making cogs turn, I think. CE, child exploitation, is the area where we work particularly closely with our community safety partnerships. And that's because quite clearly the worlds of enforcement and safeguarding quite clearly collide within that area. And how we make that work is we have a joint strategic child exploitation governance board, which I chair, it has a dotted line into both the safeguarding boards and the CSPs. But to be able to make that work really well, we've also put together a community safety partnership delivery group, which brings all of those community safety partnerships together to get them onto the same page and working in the same direction. It's taken us a long time to get to where we are on it. It's probably been 2 years in the making to get us to where we are now. But the model that we've now actually seen working for child exploitation, we're now starting to use that model to look at serious violence and some of the other things that are coming through the agenda at the moment as well. I would say that it's very much dependent on the goodwill of the people who are working and are working together. But we have seen a situation within the last 12 months where we've actually had funding that was given to one CSP that had a little bit of funding left over and actually offered to fund another CSP to help do some work. So we really have got some good work going forward with that. But working with the amount of partners that as you'll see within the document that you've got, you'll see all the list of people who are engaged, is a challenge. And it can become quite difficult when you have things in terms of just making sure everyone's coming in the same direction. And that's why many of our subgroups that sit below the main board have fewer people on, so it allows us to work through a bit more quickly and then go out to the wider partnership for consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
Yes, I'd echo how complicated it is. Councillor Daunton, like myself, sort of straddles a boundary. I thought you're certainly dealing with young people whose lives are on either side of an invisible boundary, which we have to make sure doesn't trip them up. May I go to something very simple, though? On the back of this agenda item, and knowing the time, if you haven't seen the new film about county lines, please watch it. I would love to be able to send it out to this committee. It's only 10 minutes and it is brilliant. And if any of us, like you, our grandparents, we will want to show it to our grandchildren. It is really good. And it echoes some parts of your report, which talk about using different social media, different approaches to alert both the young people we worry about and also the people who may be able to help in the community. So if I send it round, I hope you won't mind.
And actually, that's really,
it'd probably better come from an officer, really, wouldn't it?
I'm more than happy to circulate it afterwards. And I have to say, that's when I mentioned about resources that have been used across the CSPs, it was exactly that film. Actually, it was a film that we had commissioned locally within the county. We were very clear that many of the county lines films that were currently available had demographies and drug dealers that weren't necessarily reflective of what we were seeing locally. And we also knew that our young people needed to see local landmarks to realise actually this can happen in my town or my city. And that was a really good example of a fantastic piece of work that's taken place. That's a localised resource for us and has been localised in the city of Cambridge. It's now being localised into Peterborough and also into the Fenland area. So a really, really good piece of partnership working there. But I'm more than happy to circulate that post-meeting.
Brilliant, thank you. And Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, given that it's, as Councillor Daunton and indeed Joe Proctor has described, it's a very complex bit of knitting together that has to happen. And I just wondered, to what degree do you feel a priority is driven from above? And so from the police and the major authorities downwards, and to what degree, sorry, not just the police, and to what degree is it driven by people on the ground as to what your priorities are? Thank you. So
any of the priorities that we go to and we have, and you'll see that the ones that we have at the moment, in fact, we're just going to continue with those, are neglect, child sexual abuse, child exploitation and learning lessons from case reviews. We go into consultation with any of those priorities. We kind of look at them at an executive safeguarding board level, which is our statutory partners. But to inform that executive board discussion where that's signed off, myself or my service go out, we do surveys across the public, we do surveys with service users, we do surveys with our frontline practitioners, because often what our frontline practitioners are telling us are issues and not necessarily always what senior managers are telling us are issues. And we also take it through all of the various managerial levels as well, so that at the point that we say this is what we think we need to be concentrating on at the next 12 months, we do have a good evidence base to be able to take that forward. The other area that very much drives where we go is what we're getting coming out of case reviews, both nationally and locally. And also, obviously, we do get some direction from government through, whether that's through the police or through health, or obviously through central government in terms of where they would like us to look. But anything that we take forward in any of the priorities, we do get a good evidence base before we agree that's what we're going to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank Joe and others responsible for putting this report together. It is a very good report, albeit that it might seem a bit late, but it is, as with all reports, you're always looking backwards and learning from it. And also thank you for the offer of the film. I'd be interested in seeing that. But and this is where I might get a bit embarrassed myself, because I probably should know the answer. But how are the elected members, both here in Cambridge and Peterborough, how are they represented? Who is actually on this board who represents the elected members? Are you able to tell me that, Joe?
I am. So Councillor Goodliffe is your member on the Children's Safeguarding Board for Cambridgeshire. Yep. And then Councillor is Councillor Walsh. No, it's not Councillor Walsh, actually, sorry.
Joe, you broke up just then.
You're breaking up, Joe, but I'm thinking you're trying to say Councillor Linnares is the representation for Peterborough on the board. Yeah. Thank you. Any further comments or questions, please? No, in which case we are asked, she says having lost her place, asked to receive and note the content of this report, which we have done. Which brings us to the end of today's meeting. Committee will next meet on Tuesday, the 17th of May, and I thank you all for coming today, and huge thanks to all our officers for preparing and presenting. Thank you very much.